How old is she? 95, and she had a mini stroke, so.
No, that's rough.
No, 95, that's an age gap.
There's no mini at 95.
That's what I said. How old is she? 90. Great.
Okay, we are now
We're
streaming
live.
live.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I am Stephanie Simone Mahaney, the Chair of the Zoning and Land Use Committee, and we are meeting tonight with Carolyn Grossman Marr and David Weisglass and Lucia. You're here online or on Zoom. This is a hybrid meeting of the committee, and tonight our representatives from City Planning are going to continue the conversation with us about the City of Yes, the economic opportunity portion. So David, if you would like to begin the presentation,
Sure.
you said you're going to do a short one here.
Yeah.
Great.
I can run through it quickly. Let's see. Sorry, I don't want to have it ready.
Okay. Is this one?
CB10, yeah.
And while we're getting it up, I'll just say, first of all, thank you for having us back. In a more intimate setting. I'm sure we all appreciate, being able to have a conversation. I know many of you both are familiar with the proposal, both because you've seen a presentation on it first and spent so much of your time going through the text. So thank you for that. And we really appreciate all of the work that the boards all across the city are doing to understand. We really do know this is very, very complicated work. And I think your questions really told us that you guys are doing your due diligence. So we thought it would be useful to present to make sure that we're all seeing the same information and coming from the same baseline of facts. We looked at all of your questions, so I know we'll have a good Q&A afterwards, but maybe just to start from the most basic of premises of why we're doing this at all. And then make sure you know what we're intending to do through the major proposals. And then we'll talk more about it. Okay.
Okay,
Not to
great.
belabor the
Yeah.
start.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I know I've met most of you here, but to everyone online or anyone I haven't met, I'm David
All right.
Weisglass. I'm team leader for South Brooklyn Community Districts. I'm happy to be here. I'm excited to be in the office. I actually haven't been in the office. I'm always in another facility. This is great. Yeah, so we know that you've done a ton of research already, and so we're going to speed through a little bit, just like a short overview, and we can leave a lot of time for Q&A, clarifications, things like that. So I'm going to head to the next one. Great. So this is an overview of the timelines, right? So the City of Yes proposal, I think many of you know there are 3 proposals, 3 text amendments going through. One has already been approved, and that's City of Yes for carbon neutrality. And we came and spoke to you many times about that. We're now in City of Yes for economic opportunity. And then later there will be a housing opportunity, which will come for referral in the spring. We've had info sessions about that, so there's a lot of material online, but that we want to leave that for the future, talk about the most time sensitive items here. You could look at the timelines here. I know it's small and maybe difficult to see for us in the room, but essentially the important part is we're coming to the end of 2023. The public hearing for this item has not actually been scheduled. However, in terms of community board engagement and the ways for you to raise your concerns in an official document and make sure the CPC sees it, we've confirmed that as long as you submit something by the end of January, the CPC will see it. You have the opportunity to go into detail on all the proposals. It's not a simple yes on all of it, no on all of it. You can get into the nitty gritty of it and your reasoning behind any of your recommendations, and the CPC will see it. And once we know when the actual public hearing is scheduled, we will of course publicize that. If you want to attend the public hearing in addition, you're welcome to do that. It's public. And then, so that's the update basically on our timeline, which is that middle red line for everyone following along at home.
And I don't know what something on formatting is getting weird. It suggests we're at the end of the public review period for this project. We're not, I don't know if anybody
We're
else.
going into February, I understand.
We'll be as David said, you have until at least the end of January to make your recommendations. The City Planning Commission will have its hearing sometime around then. We think this is ultimately wrapped up sometime next spring at the City Council. So we don't know the exact dates because we have not scheduled anything at CPC, in part because we're so busy out talking to community boards and waiting to see how this review period goes, but we think sometime around the end of your review, we'll schedule a hearing, have a month or so of, discussions with the city planning commission before something we hope goes to the council.
Okay.
Great. You hit the next slide. So I know you guys have seen this already. So basically over the last, year, 2 years, just to begin, we've really gone on a tour of the entire city. We've taken kind of stock of some of the struggles that small businesses have had, right? And you can see some of the outlines. These are just some of the things that we've heard from some of our small businesses of their difficulty in understanding what's permitted in different places, their difficulty being able to get through processes when really what they're proposing is something that is usually in line with what already exists in many neighborhoods. And so we're trying to make things a little bit simpler for small business owners to be successful in New York without, drastically changing the character of neighborhoods, right? And so that's really what we're trying to do here. You see some examples, right? The rules won't let me expand my bakery, right? We have a small business that's doing pretty well, but why put a limit, right? To kind of what they can accomplish and make sure they can be successful as long as they don't, drastically change the character of the neighborhood. And so that's why
That's a real big.
Very big.
Drastically changing the character of a neighborhood, it to me is just verbiage.
Fair, that's fair. I mean, those are drastic in the eyes of whom, right? That's all very fair. That's why we have a document that's 1,000, how many pages long?
And let's get
Right,
it.
yeah,
right.
we'll get into the specifics of that, right? And that's why we really took care to go into the nitty-gritty details, and that's what we want to do here today. All right, we can get into the next one. So basically, we have 18 proposals, and we put them into 4 buckets just for the sake of explanation and clarity, right? And so, first of all, we want to allow businesses to be located near their customers, right? It's very difficult for small business to succeed if its customers are very, very far away, even in 2023, right? That's still the case. So we want to expand where businesses can locate within reason, right? Number 2, we want to support businesses and industrial growth, right? Or an industry growth, rather. So there's impediments that we found that are left over from the 1961 zoning resolution that don't really reflect the way businesses operate today, don't really necessarily, in our opinion, reflect the way that a lot of neighborhoods work, right? And so we want to update those a little bit. We want to foster vibrant neighborhoods, right? We want to make sure commercial streets are vibrant, that they have a lot of, pedestrian activity, a lot of window shoppers, and that's a good way for businesses to be able to survive. It's also, a good safety measure, right? Having eyes on the street. And making sure that it's, aesthetically pleasant, right? That's also something that we're focused on with our streetscape rules, which we can go into in a bit if you'd like to. And finally, give businesses more clarity and predictability. This is something we've heard from so many businesses, large and small. They just don't know where to go a lot of the times, right? And they don't have the money or the resources to hire some, fancy land use attorney, right? Or a consultant, exactly. And so that's something that we'd like to focus on as well. So you want to fast forward? So again, we're not going to go into the nitty-gritty details of all these, but we'll have time for Q&A. So first one here is ground floor usage. Let me make sure I'm going the right place. Right, so we want to make it easier for businesses to find space and to grow, right? By lifting the zoning barriers so they can locate close to their customers, right? Our zoning rules governing businesses, they haven't been updated since 1961. And so we think making things more simple, more adaptable.
What has not been updated since 61?
Most of the zoning that reflects how
That was the
we
last
do
thing
commercial zoning, like uses.
Right. So there have been obviously zoning text amendments since then, but related to commercial regulation, right? And commercial uses, it's mostly since 1961. One of the classic examples we use is there's a definition for typewriter repair, nothing for cell phone repair, right? Obviously, that's just a high level definition, but that's one of the reasons that we thought, well, let's give clarity to folks, right? Both business owners and folks like yourselves, right? To know what's permitted where, make things a little bit, more straightforward and simple. All right, number 2, in many places in the city, we have zoning districts that are located on. Is that a question or just? Oh, it looks like I think Doris would be. Unmuted, so it might just be okay. In many places of the city, so we've got zoning districts that you know, if you walk down the street to the naked eye, you wouldn't even really be able to tell the difference most of the time. A lot of these are C1 and C2 overlay districts. It's not uncommon, if you can kind of see that second circle there, that image,
Mhm.
on one side of the street to have a C1 overlay, on the other side to have a C2 overlay. There's differences in those regulations that may have been well-meaning at the time when they were put in, but are a little bit onerous now, and again, don't really serve the corridor very well or the neighborhood very well. For instance, C2 neighborhoods allow bike repair, C1 only allows bike sale. If I sell bikes, why can't I, repair it maybe a little bit, something like that in general. If we go along to number 3, clean production. So there's a lot of, and this is, I think, something that's a little bit more modern too, right? The way that production actually works in 2023. Not all of it is these big industrial, noise and pollution manufacturing sites. A lot of them are very small scale production. And so we want to clarify what can be permitted. A lot of these are 3D printing places, jewelry makers, coffee roasters, things like that. Where technically they're production, but the rules that we have right now don't actually allow those small scale production businesses to locate near their customers, right? And that's something.
Coffee roasting is an interesting one because there's an environmental aspect to
Absolutely.
coffee roasting.
Certainly, yeah, we'll get into that.
Okay,
We can
good.
certainly get into that.
Good.
Yeah. All right, number 4 is upper floor commercial, right? This is something that we've heard a lot of as well, right? So if there's, clean production businesses, wanted to move into an empty office building, for instance, they face a lot of rules, right? That would require them to, oh, actually, this is a different one. This is the one document. The updated one. I'm
So,
just bringing this up.
I
Yeah,
think
feel
we have
free.
one. So upper floor commercial, I think we talked about in low density districts, the primary effect is that in some places you'll have a doctor's office. Actually, I just saw it walking on Fifth Avenue, on around 70th Street. I think there's a physical therapy
I got it,
office,
yeah.
right? Occupies the second store, that's legal. That physical therapy went away. Nobody else can occupy that space except a doctor's office. So we are proposing to allow commercial uses to occupy those spaces under the same standards, which require separate access between residential and commercial space. So
Where, on the avenues, or are you talking about?
on the avenue, so in the commercial district, so like
So
along
what's-
Fifth Avenue, if you build.
Which would now be called what? Once this comes through, what would Fifth Avenue be rezoned as?
So
No
no
rezone.
rezone. Yeah, so that's something that's important to clarify.
Because my understanding is we were gonna lose C1 and C2 and they were gonna combine them all.
No.
Understood
Great-
that that's,
great question.
yeah, that's
It
it.
is
Did
at
that
the top,
end? That went away?
That is
That-
at the top of the list in terms of our questions that we already submitted to CPC, and I'm very curious about that
Yeah.
answer. But if we want to get through this, I thought better to.
Yeah,
If
We'll
so-
get
Long
back.
answer, that's not our intent. Long answer, we'll get back to.
My understanding is we're gonna have the C1 and C2, but there's gonna be a lot more things allowed in the C1 and C2.
A few more things will be allowed in C1.
Which means it goes up a little bit higher from what the current C1s and C2s
Right,
are.
it's a lot of higher
Right.
use groups will now be,
In-
as
to
of,
the
as of
C4.
right uses available.
That is not necessarily
the
true.
case.
No,
Okay,
no,
okay,
yeah, we'll get
all
into
right,
that.
all right.
We
Keep
already
going.
started, can you just
Keep
clarify,
going.
it still will be a C1, C2 overlay?
Yes,
Yes,
That will be the term, or that is.
yes,
yeah.
yes,
Yeah,
absolutely. And we talked to DOT on your behalf and we'll-
And
will be
residence district
codified?
this is mapped on top of a residence district.
yes,
correct.
Gotcha.
Okay,
So
not
it's
going
in
away.
a residence
it's
district.
in
in,
a residence.
Mhm.
district.
So that's very
The
important.
overlay in a residence.
that
district.
lays the foundation for everything else, because really what we're talking about in Community Board 10 are primarily a C1, C2 overlay.
Mhm.
Okay,
Yep.
so mapped on a residence district.
Yes.
Yes.
Not changing that, making what we think, and you will opine on, are modest tweaks to what is allowed in the C1. And a few in the C2 as well.
Okay.
Yes,
let's
modest
hear
changes to how a C1 and a C2 overlay function.
it.
Well,
Okay.
it's like when I see my granddaughter, she thinks the length of her skirt is modest. I think it's too short.
Three hours on that one too.
That's a good one.
She learned a lot of-
Stephanie,
That's very good.
You have a stand up.
Stephanie,
Yes.
hey
Yeah.
Stephanie.
Yes.
May I ask, not so much a question about the content, just to be sure I've heard this correctly. Did the city planning folks say that where the businesses are going to be allowed on the upper levels, that there will be separate entrances required and separate stairways
Yes,
to the different kinds of uses? Is that what you said?
That's correct.
Is that realistic on a 20-foot wide mixed-use building or 30-foot wide? Are we talking about putting new stairways to the upper floors?
It's quite unusual in an existing building to be able to retrofit that, which is part of why we think it's
Okay.
extremely unlikely to be seen in an existing building. Where we
Okay.
see it as I mentioned, I think it's around 70th Street. You already have a condition where the building was built to have second-story medical offices. So the
Mhm.
building was already designed to get commercial access while there's still residences on the third floor. That's the kind of space we think could be reoccupied by commercial space if the medical use went vacant. We
Okay.
do not think it is likely that anybody is going to rebuild a 25-foot storefront to
Right.
create a commercial built, piece on the second floor. It's not just separated access. There's also building code standards that you trigger when you're separating commercial and residential uses. So that second story would have to be, if it wasn't built that way, would have to have new fire ratings, right? Like it's very, very expensive to retrofit that. We do not think that that is a likely outcome of this at all. Where it is much more important is when you're talking about larger buildings where converting, actually there is a significant budget. And so those kinds of retrofits start to make more sense, but not in a single story, not in a
It's
single.
not in the middle of
commercial
the
unit.
block where you only have one staircase going up. and it's-
Very, very rare.
But the most important thing here is that there will be no prohibition.
On
In
what?
other words, what you're saying here is that it's unlikely, it probably won't happen, but why don't you just provide for them, that it shouldn't happen?
Because there are cases where we actually think it does make sense, like what I just described. So
So
if
who
you're
would have,
medical
who would
office,
have, who would
makes
have
that-
the authority over
Exactly.
that? In other words, the building department would look at the plans and go, no, this isn't gonna work, sorry.
that's right. The threshold in
Would
terms
be
of
at
the
build- would be now
physical
at the building
standards, the
level.
apps, the access to the building, all of the things that you would need, those are part of the DOB filing requirements.
I want to follow up on that. So right here on the avenues, you have street level stores. Then you have a door to go up to the residences on the second and third floor.
Or a business, a
But-
lawyer's office or
Would
something.
that stairwell be considered a separate access if somebody wanted to make commercial on the
No,
second
because it's
floor?
accessing the residences.
So anything that's accessing a resident cannot be used for commercial
That's right.
on
It
the
has to be
second floor?
separated commercial residents completely.
Okay,
Okay, but if a building owner were to want to forego any residential in that building, then the
Mhm.
existing stair could provide the prerequisite for the whole building to be changed to commercial.
Hmm.
Correct?
Okay.
In a 3-story building, that's not legal. In a 2-story building, perhaps you could fit the zoning. It's very tight to suggest that there's even enough FAR there for you to do.
Well,
So,
we're talking about existing buildings.
right, so for an
Commercial
existing,
affair, yeah.
an existing 2-story building.
With a residence on top.
Where
and a store on
one
bottom.
story is residence and 1 story is residential.
Would there be a process for the building owner to go through? Some hoops?
Yeah, in that case, it is possible more because the physical access would not have to be retrofitted. You would still have all of the same building code standards where you had to physically upgrade a residence into a commercial unit, so still quite expensive to do that. And again, in a building where there's a 3rd story, this is not possible because you would not,
And
the 3rd story can't be used for
and isn't the
commercial.
commercial
use.
FAR still remaining on the overlays?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, like, I
Right, so
guess,
the
you could-
commercial of it,
depending on
yeah.
the size of the building, you might be able
Because it'll still
to
be
max
1.0
out.
in the low density, right?
Yeah.
R5, yeah, okay, so
Yeah,
that,
but the community facility could solve the FAR problem.
And that's true today.
yeah, that's already permitted as it stands. And to go to just a real quick on the commercial item, so getting a little bit into the weeds, but
That's okay.
yeah, but The commercial FAR is different than the residential FAR, even in an overlay, right? And it's designed that way because these are residential districts with overlays as opposed to fully commercial districts, right? So in an R5 district or below, and with a commercial overlay, the FAR is 1.0, which is designed that way because we're trying to, or they were at 1961 trying to encourage exactly the type of building you see, 1 story of a store with residential above. It's very hard to have commercial above with 1.0.
With a 1.0 FAR.
Right, now R7 and above, or I guess R6 and above, right, with a commercial overlay is allowed 2.0 FAR, right, a little bit more. Even with that though, it's almost always less because the residential district is higher than the FAR for the residential. So you can't really convert a whole building if it's more than like 2 stories to commercial, if that makes sense. And so if you wanted to maintain that 3rd or 4th story as residential, you'd have to add the extra stairs.
You'd have to have some room to do that.
Yeah, you need a lot of room and then you're losing a foot. Yeah, it's just a very difficult
And just to
situation.
say, this is a condition, allowing 2nd story retail does exist in some districts across the city already.
There's already offices up there. We know that. We've seen them on the 2nd stories all along 5th Avenue and 3rd Avenue.
Nobody
Some-
does anything.
Some people has.
Well, right, and in those cases here, they're
And
not,
those are allowed. I assume some of them are allowed.
they may be non-conforming grandfathered.
I've seen
They're not allowed under
lawyers'
zoning.
offices and.
Most of them they're
They're-
illegal,
So
They are?
are all
that I'm familiar with.
uses that are permitted
I
on
didn't
the
know
1st
that.
floor in a C1, C2,
Okay.
will they be permitted on a 2nd floor in a C1, C2? Are there any prohibitions on certain uses for a 2nd story? Just the nature of the business.
No, I think what we're trying to do is remove those prohibitions that remain.
So you could technically have any sort of like bike repair on a 2nd story.
Nah, that wouldn't make sense.
Well,
Well,
But the
what I'm
que- tell
trying
me
to
que-
get at
I
is,
get it.
I don't want to go with just theoreticals, but
Mhm.
so long as you're opening the door to something. I just want to be clear, if someone wants to do it, they
Mhm.
could do it, is what you're saying.
Yeah,
Or you
and I
can
think-
have battery storage on a 2nd floor, because if it's part of maybe it's a 2-story business.
Yes, and I think what we would ask is there a particular concern that you're identifying with one of those uses and its location on the 2nd
Well,
floor? We
anything
have
with
not.
batteries is a huge problem.
But that is only
But-
one thing I'm
but
thinking of right now. But
on
there-
the
there are
2nd story as opposed to
you
the
have a
ground floor.
butcher shop up
Right.
there?
That's the thing, there's no prohibition then on anything for the 2nd story business. Anything that's on the ground floor.
Right, the prohibition is around how you physically relate to the residential,
Right.
which is what we see as the primary land use concern. We have not within that distinguished between, I will say actually one caveat to that, which is that for particularly noisy uses that are new introductions, we have created effectively a noise buffer. So we've said that if you are a new commercial use that is on the same floor or newly adjacent to residences, that you have to have basically like a story between you. So that's the
What
one
about either
distinction.
side?
I'm sorry, Carolyn, can you just repeat that whole answer again? Because I'm not understanding. Stephanie's question was if, is there any difference between the use that can be on a ground floor and a 2nd floor? And I'm sorry, maybe it's just me and maybe it's late in the day, but I didn't get.
Yeah,
don't understand.
apologies,
I don't
it's also,
understand the answer.
I may not be that coherent. And actually, the answer I was giving is not it's not exclusive to the 2nd floor. So let me step back and say, no, we have not distinguished between 2nd story and ground floor. And the reason is because we have not seen a particular land use reason to do so. What we have been primarily concerned with is about the interface between where a commercial use meets the residences, right? The ceiling of the commercial use and the floor of the residence. And that could happen between the 1st and 2nd story. That could happen between the 15th and 16th
What
story.
about between the building A and building B where the residence is next to a commercial building?
If I may just interject, what does go on there? So you said you're concerned about that. So what provision have you made? Or are you contemplating about where the residential meets commercial?
Yes, so under the environmental review, we created a new requirement that looked at a particular class of or we looked at uses that we thought would be particularly noisy, right? So things that we were concerned about having a noise impact on adjacencies. So that's things like the small scale manufacturing uses or places of assembly, things like bars, right? And in those cases, the new rules say you need to have basically space between your use and you basically need to have non-noisy uses next to residences. So if you're on the second story, you could not have a residence immediately above
What about to your right or to your left?
or to your right or to your left.
That's what important, because the walls may be pretty thick,
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
fire
so there's a
rating, but they're
requirement
still
that basically
sound.
says either separate by 15 feet, basically left to right, which is equivalent to like a story.
And what would that
Or-
require? A wall or space or barrier?
Wall, space, barrier,
Air,
walls.
some sort of
Yeah, It
sound
could be other,
attenuation.
yeah, it could be other uses. We're not imagining people keep like a vacuum of space. We are imagining things like, if you, for instance, in this, had a bar on a rooftop space that you might have like a building's gym instead of a residence, like that kind of a, right, that kind of thing. You can't have people living in the space next to it, but you could have other kinds of uses that aren't as sensitive as as a home, right? A lobby space, right? Could be fine. So we wrote those standards in. There's an alternative that basically allows you to acoustically engineer to a higher standard, right? So basically like pad your walls to the effective same condition. That's extremely expensive. Again, another reason why we think this is extremely unlikely in a storefront commercial condition, because those hurdles really, you can't create that separation of space if you're in a 25-foot storefront next to a residence is next door.
So one question from a drafting perspective, how does one write into a zoning resolution a noisy use? Like, how is that defined? What are we calling that? Are we, I'm just curious, like, how would that be written? Because many businesses can be noisy. So how do we, when you're drafting this, right? So how do you write that? So if you have a noisy business, you need, acoustic engineering or 15 feet. How are those defined? Are they a certain use group or?
Happy to pass along the specific provision. I don't know if you're able to pull it up on the fly here. Happy to send you the text after the fact. The answer is the class of uses is specific to the things we're introducing, right? So we're not trying to restrict things that already exist today. And the things that we had to do an environmental analysis of all of the new classes of uses. So the classes of uses that we thought systematically were noisy are the things that are considered in small scale production.
Limited.
So use group 10, and things that are places of assembly, which are part of use group 6. So those are identified specifically. And the attenuation standards do reference decibel levels and all
Gotcha.
of these
As
other
long as we got
differences.
something that I could point to a number and say, this doesn't meet this number, I understand that.
Good for you, because the acoustic of stuff is
But
my
does
butt.
anybody ever pay attention, if you think about where we are right now?
Well, you would be required to under
Well,
DOP standards.
I know that. There are many things that are required, but they are absolutely ignored by the city. And that's one of the things that you have to look at right now. It's very fine that you're telling me these things, but what I see here is that we can wind up with a person who's living above a store, all right? And wind up with a butcher shop next to them, okay? A bar downstairs. I mean, there's the intermixing of it. You can say, I mean, who's gonna call the cops? Where are the regulations that would tell
Well,
them
you
what's
wouldn't
gonna
call the
happen?
cops.
And
You'd have to
and
call
then
the Department of
and
Building.
the question is, no, I'm just saying, like, where it just seems to me that this intermixing is just beyond control. I'm not saying that you're not trying to control it, but I don't see how it's going to be controlled since it's not controlled real well right now.
That's a good point.
My overall concern with this is the one size fits all.
Yeah.
That's my overall concern. And as soon as we get into that one size fits all, you have so many potential problems
Right.
that neither you or we see, because we've lived that, we've approved certain things. Anyway, the one size fits all, we do not have now, and that's what protects us. So we're going from being protected to unprotected. That's my overall huge concern. Now, if you can tell me that some of the recommendations that will make sense can be adopted and implemented and changed, that's one thing. But this board, I'll speak for myself, I have not seen that in the 22 years that I'm on the board.
Do you mind clarifying one size fits all in terms of?
In terms of the entire proposed, now, a lot of, yeah, a lot of things I think are great, you know, clarifying the user. A lot of it is great and a lot of it doesn't apply to us. But one size fits all that applies to us is one size fits all for the city. And, you know, we have the special zoning district.
Right.
We have the special zoning for Dyker Heights. All those things were implemented
By us.
to make the commercial and residential communities fit well. And this is a big push on the commercial side, on the business side. Not all of it bad, but it will have the potential for negative impacts which do not exist today.
So, well, I thought they did exist today, but to clarify, I guess where I'm struggling a little bit is the one size fits all. So Bay Ridge has a special district, but it has I mean, it's a very short text, actually. It doesn't actually have a lot of regulation on commercial.
No, but
No.
but most of Bay Ridge is the C1 district.
Which is found all over the city.
Right, so the one-
C2, but I think we have more, I mean, not every district has the amount of C1 on their overlay as we do in Bay Ridge.
Some do, right? I mean, this is there's a variety of C1, like, we use the C zoning in a variety and diversity of conditions all across the city. So each neighborhood has a very unique mix of which zoning districts it's using, and it is true that when we affect something that changes those commercial zoning districts, it has effects from Bay Ridge to Castle Hill, right? That is the nature of zoning, is that we use citywide tools to create really specific neighborhood outcomes, right? Because we map those tools in the ways that are most responsive. I don't know if that's helpful. Dean, I think I would just say we're here to hear from you the specific ways in which it will impact the neighborhood. And ultimately that's your job, is to tell us those specific ways. So I hear the fear. We certainly heard it last week, 2 weeks ago. It seems so fresh. Help us understand as much as you can where the
Let's do
specific
the rest of the proposal and then.
Yes.
If I may just speak to that, I mean, we had a lot, I know we had a long discussion, actually, that we did, Carol and I, after the last meeting, and I thank you for that. But one of the things that helped me realize was you need specific feedback from us, but we also need specific information from you, because you drafted this, you're so close to it. We're reading these, remember, we don't all have, not all of us are extremely versed in zoning. And so we're trying to read this, digest it, figure out how it applies to our neighborhood, come back to you with very specific text changes and very specific comments. So although I understand you need that from us, sometimes it's very difficult to give it within the time frame within which this is rolled out. Right. So sometimes we need more education from you as well, just to make it the most efficient.
100%. So maybe in that interest, I know Stephanie wanted us to finish the presentation in 10 minutes.
Yeah,
We got wildly off track.
Let's keep going.
Why don't we do that, and then we'll come back to Q&A.
Yep, let's do that.
Yes.
And of course, we're happy to continue to follow up. I know we already have one follow-up, which is to direct you to that specific attenuation text.
And we had submitted those questions, and those are the real highlights.
Yeah,
that-
we want to get there.
Okay.
I will speed through. Okay, talked about our fourth commercial. This last one under this bucket is new law style districts. These are in our M districts, right? So you see those around 65th. A lot of times, I think there's another pocket of M that I can't think of right now. So basically, there's a lot of regulations about the actual buildings that are permitted in the EM districts that we think are a little bit obsolete, a little bit outdated, right? This goes back to 1961, the way industry worked then compared to now, right? And so there's a lot of low density options or physical design rules and parking requirements or loading requirements that make it basically impossible to build the kind of building that you do see there, those loft style buildings, which are more efficient, usually a little bit better, where they already actually exist now, right? So what we're doing is creating, new zoning districts that actually will not be mapped as a result of this. They will just be on the menu in the future, right? So if I own a property in an M district, I currently, in some of these districts, don't have the opportunity to, have zoning that would encourage that kind of use.
We've
or
got
that kind of
ongoing
building.
rezonings in Jamaica, Long Island City,
Right.
parts of Crown Heights. They can benefit from those districts. No purpose right now known for them in Bay Ridge.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, I
Understood.
just want to emphasize that if this passes, right, this passes and that proposal passes, none of these districts will be mapped, right? What we're doing is just adding to the menu of options, right? All right, let's go to goal
Yeah,
number
but you're,
2.
you're giving us the possibility. That's what you're doing. You're saying that there's a possibility. There shouldn't be a possibility for that. As a resident of Bay Ridge, you don't want to change the landscape of this neighborhood. It's beautiful. The way it is, not by putting in a building like that. And on Third Avenue, what went up over there after the air right laws were changed, these 6-story buildings went in.
I understand.
It looks
If
terrible.
you could just let us continue, because the committee needs to continue, and then we open it up to the public, but
Yeah.
we appreciate your patience.
Well, we have applicability maps at the end that'll show where this is permitted in Bay Ridge or where something like that would be permitted. It's very, very, very limited.
Just want to say again, we're not looking at rezoning any industrial uses
Yeah,
in Bay Ridge right now. Those are not, those are tools that would have to go through future rezonings. They're not planned right now in this area.
Your insertion of right now.
But
all
you
the
say
time makes me
industrial, it should be, you should.
Well,
think right
that's
there.
the nature of zoning, right? It's like, the commission, 100 years from now, something outright, but there's no, this is not something we
Yeah,
think
but
are
it seems
appropriate.
awful, like, not right now, but
If it's-
Tomorrow.
tomorrow, right?
Then there's a
We have
possibility.
M3 districts in the text too, that we're
Right.
also not planning to map anywhere in Bay Ridge, right? This is,
Right.
we have a whole vocabulary of zoning districts that exist
Right.
for use in other places.
right.
Okay, let's
Alright.
move on. Let's get through
Yeah.
this. Then we'll have
Right.
questions.
Right, so I gotta reorganize.
This whole section is going to raise a lot of questions.
Okay.
Hold our questions till the end. Make
Right,
notes
so-
if you need to.
But yeah, so a lot of life sciences labs, they face really confusing and again, outdated rules that slow the development of these facilities, right? And life sciences laboratories are obviously very important. Make sure that New York is still kind of at the forefront of research. So we want to make it clear that a lot of these labs, without the potential for environmental hazard, right? We have this baked into the text as well, are appropriate in office settings, and sometimes they are. We want to make sure that those specific life sciences facilities would be permitted where they can be, some with a special permit, so it wouldn't necessarily be by right, so that they can locate in the future closer to their research centers. A lot of times these are near hospital or universities. Right, so that is number 6, film production.
Do you want me to rush
Yeah,
through these?
yeah,
Okay.
don't mind.
Film production,
Oh,
we have heard in certain cases that you might, there are places in the city where you can build a soundstage as a use, mostly in our industrial districts. But the bulk rules, the envelope, doesn't actually allow you to build the kind of box that a soundstage needs.
No.
And we have no way under zoning to actually grant the exception to let you reshape the building. So we are creating an authorization process here that allows you to waive those rules. Again, that is a sort of a mini ULURP action, so it's a discretionary action that goes in front of the commission and in front of the community boards, but it's the ability for businesses in commercial and manufacturing districts to ask for permission to grant to reshape buildings when their program requires it.
Is it existing buildings or new construction?
I guess it could be for an enlargement, right? So if you had a building where you were trying to put an extra story on and you couldn't do that within some sort of rule, this would allow you to ask for special permission in that case. if you had enough FAR, right? So this doesn't change the FAR, doesn't change the uses. It just says I can do everything else, but something like the shape of a building or a sky exposure plane or a
Mhm.
rear yard rule is not letting me, build the building I want to do. Okay.
I apologize. So this, I actually realized, I'm so sorry. I thought I updated this, but there's some that are wrong. So number 10, casinos,
Not in here.
that's out. It's fully out. That is completely separate from this. Nightlife, I know there were a lot of questions about that. We can get into specifics once we're kind of done running through, but just kind of expanding some of the things that might be permitted. in
Urban
certain circumstances.
agriculture.
Yep. You want to just rush it? Yeah, amusements real quick. Amusements today are different than they used to be. We want to make sure that where they're appropriate in the right places, they might be permitted.
Do
Right? Here's some
amusements
customers.
include gaming, like small?
No.
No.
So
Okay.
casinos is going through a different process based on the state licensure process, small, large. I assume that's what you mean by gaming, right?
Yes,
Versus
like
like
versus
an
video-
arcade, like I'm
Oh,
playing
okay.
video
Like
games.
Like
the-
an internet cafe that is game. Because we have that.
It was
Gaming in one sense.
That's gaming like video games.
Right.
Yeah, video gaming would be covered under amusements.
Yeah.
Casinos, games of
That's
monetary
But not like
chance.
slot machines or.
Slot machines are
Pachinko
under
or-
That's
casinos.
currently
but
not allowed.
That's all part of the
Okay.
state's
It's not
licensure.
currently allowed, but we
Right.
had a big problem with that.
But I just wanted to, that's why I'm asking.
With computer gaming,
Mhm.
big problem.
What happened?
This
Well,
was years ago.
crime, even to today, a lot of crime associated.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and then real quick, agricultural facilities, vertical farming within commercial districts. Sometimes they're permitted in commercial districts, sometimes they're not. It's confusing to know when. We want to clarify some of those rules. Where they're appropriate.
Yeah, I'm sure there's environmental regulations that go along with that as well, correct?
Things like, you mean like the energy load? the
Load
physical,
and
yeah.
then we'll, let's say, for example, if someone wanted to open a cannabis farm above a building on Third Avenue on the top floor.
Right,
You'd
That's-
need proper aeration,
absolutely.
you'd need a lot
Yeah.
of things, so those would
Yeah.
all still be in
So,
place.
All still in place. The state licensure program is
Still in
all
place.
still in place. Now, of course, the irony here is that there's a lot of illegal proliferation of stores, and we know that. They're not legal under the state rules, so it's tough here. What I would say is that the growing operations,
Right.
there's a lot less abuse of that, because when you're talking about floor loads, energy
Yeah,
systems,
sure.
harder to sneak that by regulators. So those are very much under state, but that's exactly the kind of thing we want to allow for somebody to build tomatoes indoors. And if licensed by the state, we want to allow somebody to build cannabis indoors in a licensed legal facility that's built out the proper way.
And that would fall under urban agriculture?
That would fall under urban agriculture if you had the state license.
Dispensary.
Tomatoes.
Different than a dispensary, different state license. It's a growing license is not equivalent to a sales or a consumption license, and vice versa.
And that's in use group 1 though.
Agriculture
Agriculture
agriculture is in use group
So
1.
cannabis would be in use group 1.
That is correct.
Any kind of.
So.
And that is
that's-
true. We're not changing that. That's true today.
Okay, but then that would be, just to be clear, in C1, C2. Residence districts. as
In
well.
residence districts as well. That's true today.
Okay, I just want that to be clear.
Yes, agriculture is an allowed use today in the city. What's not clear is that whether or not you can grow indoors,
Okay, agriculture, that is.
including cannabis, if licensed by the state.
Okay.
Well, you can't do it indoors though.
That is the
intent
zone-
to-
that is the
to-
intent of our
To
change.
have it indoors.
Which
Is
is
to have
not
indoor
driven by
uses.
cannabis in
Yes.
particular,
Right.
but is true of cannabis and tomatoes just the same.
Understood. And let's keep going and then we can.
Just,
we
just
can
just one
bounce.
more question when you say agriculture, and I know this may sound silly, but it doesn't include animal agriculture or anything of that nature, does it?
No, that
So
would
if
just
somebody was breeding bunnies and.
No, that's not. Great question.
It's
That,
not.
if
Thank
you're
you.
breeding,
Dave, I didn't think of
I
that.
mean, I guess there's,
How about bees?
So any animal would need a different license.
yeah, well, so animals is definitely also like a particular,
I'm
you're
just
talking about
talking, I'm
breeding
just
them?
talking about animals, I'm just saying.
Yeah, it's not agriculture.
What
I'm
is it?
pretty sure it's industrial, but I could get back to you and double check.
Okay.
And like everything else, it's probably legal as a home occupation at a small scale, if it's accessory.
All right.
We're almost.
All right, almost there. So, number 12, reactivate our storefronts, right? So there's a lot of storefront rules where, a lot of times, you know, it's these corner stores or stores where if they close and they haven't actually been reoccupied by a commercial in a certain number of years, they're not allowed to be reactivated. We think that's a little outdated and a lot of times results in just vacant storefronts that have nothing to do, right? Empty, don't contribute to streetscape quality. Number 13, I know there's a lot of questions about new corner stores. So new corner stores would be permitted with a BSA permit, correct, Carol?
A CPC authorization. So-
Right? So yeah, corner stores would be permitted in residential districts. Is there any way to, sorry. Corner stores would be permitted in residential districts, sometimes without a commercial overlay, that is true. If they qualify, if they get a CPC authorization, which is a discretionary permit.
That is referred to the community board.
Right.
So what that means is that if I'm a local store and for whatever reason, I was trying to think of a good example here, like maybe up by Leaf Erickson, where like you could imagine a world where like you have a residence district, but for some reason, it seems like a place that
There's
like.
one on Sixth Avenue. It's a perfect example. On
The
Sixth
one on
Avenue.
Sixth Avenue is definitely there, it's perfect, it's been there since the 1930s or
Right,
20s,
exactly.
something like that.
That's a good
And there-
example.
and-
of
and-
this.
So that obviously can't be replicated today, but let's say there's a world where somebody wanted to replicate that.
That's what I.
What you could do is, as a small business owner, come to the community board and say, I would like a store up to 2,500 square feet, so it's like typical storefront size. You'd have to go through an environmental review, so quite a high threshold here, right? You'd have to study whether there were any traffic impacts, any noise impacts, or any other neighborhood character impacts. You'd make your case to the CB, and then it'd come back to the city planning commission, who would have to have findings, and we'll happily direct you to this specific language as well, that are very specific to not doing harm to the neighborhood character. So we have a lot of different ways that we like have findings. This one is highly discretionary. It's
So it's
really
almost
designed.
like you're not even changing it, because ideally, right now, if a business owner wanted to do that, he could.
No,
No.
He couldn't
This
do it,
is-
even if he got a special zone.
Right,
we
so-
don't have a way to grant that.
There's no way to
Sixth
grant that.
Avenue is grandfathered.
Gotcha.
Right, so I think that's a really good example. Let's do a hypothetical real quick. I know we want to get through it,
And
but
this is actually part of our question and
Yeah,
about the
please.
CPC.
Exactly.
authorization. And then maybe you can address why this doesn't require a full ULUR.
sure, we can get into that. So something like the corner store proposal, and I don't think that's really the only one. I think there's a thought, understandably so, that it's like, well, we're doing this to introduce them everywhere. And that's really not necessarily the case. Not something that we anticipate, not something that we think is really the case, right? Let's say today, hypothetically,
Mhm.
there's a neighborhood that says, oh my God, I'm so far from the local deli, so far from, the local bodega or something. I wish that they could just open on this corner or something. Even in a hypothetical where the whole neighborhood wants it, there's no chance. Zoning says it doesn't matter what the community wants it. We can't do it. There's no opportunity. This offers a very, very small, limited opportunity for those situations where the community likes it. And we have determined, the City Planning Commission has determined that there will not be excessive nuisances or damage to the traffic circulation, the neighborhood character, that this could be permitted, right? So basically, that's something that we've heard as we've gone around. There are those situations, they may not be in your neighborhood, and that's fine. But there are situations in which there's a lot of communities that would like something like that to be permitted. And so we allow something with a very high bar, right? A high barrier to entry for those certain circumstances.
Can you give us an example of one place where they would, like say in Bay Ridge, where that would not be an issue?
What
I'm saying to you,
apologize.
you're saying that there are communities that would say, oh, we'd really like to have this, okay? Give me an
I can't think of
example.
one in Bay Ridge, but I can tell you, and I don't remember the specifics, we'd be happy to follow up. In Diker Heights, I believe, maybe 10 years ago, there was a rezoning to commercial for a dance studio that like had been there historically and wanted to expand into the next storefront and legally could not do so because they were allowed to remain because they were non-conforming, but they were in a residence district. Everyone loved it, but they legally couldn't do it. And we had a long time. I do believe they ended up getting a commercial rezoning, but the problem with the commercial rezoning is that they're generally considered inappropriate in the middle of a residence district, right? We don't, like precisely the reasons you're all talking about, we don't take lightly the idea of mapping commercial districts in the middle of a residence district. So this is a tool with that kind of condition in mind, where we could say, we're not trying to create commercial districts, we're just trying to allow this one store. So that was one case where it was supported by the community. They did eventually find a route, but like at much expense, at much like sort of legal quandary of how to get them there.
How big was this community and what are you talking about?
How big was the store?
What I'm concerned
Probably
about,
around the
what
same
I'm
size.
concerned about here, to be perfectly frank, is winding up with your situation down on Ridge Boulevard, up in Diker Heights, or something of this nature. And as somebody comes along and says, we'd like to have this almost makes it sound like this is not gonna be difficult to get this.
No, it is quite difficult.
It's incredibly difficult. As someone who works on authorizations and applications, I mean, just the environmental review is something that a lot of these small businesses
It
can't
costs
even afford.
$100,000, right? So our, with due respect, our concern at city planning has always been that this is actually a quite expensive thing to ask a small business owner to do. And all of our other rules, for the most part, are trying to decrease the costs for small business owners. Asking a small business owner to go through a full or a mini ULURP and an environmental review and hire land use attorneys is a lot to ask. We
Right,
think that
right.
that will be very challenging.
And it should be. Okay.
Okay,
That's
so-
Right, so that's why
We
we
agree,
come
yeah.
up with this, is that we say, it. In a commercial district, we're trying to decrease the cost. When it comes to introducing a store into a residence district, we think that high bar is necessary to protect the quality.
But
of
Is
but
life.
there-
it should be so
But it
high,
means-
but I'm saying if it's so high, why are you doing it at all? I mean, this is something that could be abused at some point.
Well,
And I
why not
don't
the
see,
full
I don't see, and I do not see personally, okay, introducing something that could be abused in the future. That's all.
That's, oh, I'm sorry,
Okay.
what's that?
Lori?
Lori?
So, I guess what I'm hearing is that the high bar is really a monetary bar. And
And a discretionary review bar.
I'm sorry, what?
The city plan, also a discretionary review bar, even if they paid all this money and went to the community board and then went to the CPC, the
You might
CPC
say-
can reject them and then they'd lose all that money. So the only type of business we foresee that would actually do this is one that knows it has the community, that has done that research to ensure, or not ensure, no, nothing's ever insured with the CPC, but where they really think that they've got a good
And
chance.
when we call it corner
Well,
stores,
well, if I might just,
So,
so,
ahead.
so I guess my comment is this: I never really feel comfortable. I know that in certain areas it pans out that, when we're talking about different zoning regulations, what I've heard a lot is that it's not the intention that these things that will become possible will actually be utilized to their full extent. That the intent is that there's a right being given, so there's a possibility, but it's not contemplated that many of these provisions will be used to their full extent. And I think that may be a dangerous viewpoint to take when drafting a zoning resolution, because I always assume, especially in the arena of real estate where there is a lot of money and a lot of creativity once these things are put into effect and ways to get around things, that if you are not intending something to be used to its full extent, then that should just be what's written. The other thing is that I don't really think that the monetary aspect should really be the high bar, because I mean, if we're talking about a corner store, if it is in fact the reality that it would really be cost prohibitive, then this is really not giving any effective right at all, right? If it's really like you're looking for a corner store that's going to service the residential neighborhood, your little bodega or whatever the case may be, we're going into this knowing that based on that business model, it will never be worth it for someone to pay all this money to get that corner store, regardless of how much maybe the community wants it, unless everyone's going to chip in. So it just seems to me that maybe if that is your intent, maybe you should go back to the drawing board on this a little. Because I
Well,
do know there are areas that could use a corner store. I get your point, but I'm not really
It's so
understanding why
prohibitive.
you're getting at it this way.
So we'd love to hear from the community board your idea. Is cost prohibitive? I would say from our perspective, we don't
No,
like
no,
making
that's
that
not
cost
right.
prohibitive both
Well,
ways,
that's-
right?
yeah,
Like,
that's
so
what I
we're
mean.
hearing
I'm hearing
feedback about
What
making it.
we're saying is why do it at all? Okay,
Because if there is one corner store ever that opens in a community in, I don't know, the Bronx, it's done its job, maybe, right? Because if it's one situation where a community actually wants something.
You're looking,
and
you're
they
looking
raise
at,
that
you're looking
high
at
bar.
food deserts, areas where people can't get
We're looking at
access.
Staten Island, we're looking
Right,
at
you're
Eastern
looking at- you're
Bronx,
looking at
we're
the
looking at
Bronx.
Eastern Queens. There are a lot of places where we think this might make sense. There have been cases in the past where we've run into places where we know this would have made sense and where the existing tools were insufficient. So, but they are few and far between. It's not like our doors being, beaten down by hundreds of people saying, if only you would give us corner stores. We know of a handful of circumstances over the last 10 years where something like this would have been helpful to communities trying to facilitate that sort of very specific, neighborhood specific outcome that you've all talked about, right? Our job is to try and have the tools to respond to those. We know that this is a condition that exists where we don't have any tools. So we are attempting to create a tool, and how we shape that tool is open for discussion. So, if you think the findings aren't strong enough to give the community the kind of protection you need, I think we'd be happy to hear that. I think you've asked a couple of times about why not a full
Right.
ULURP. In that case, we think what you mean is a special permit,
Mhm.
because that is the next step up from an authorization. Our reasoning again was trying to balance like what we were asking small business owners to do, with creating the right levels of protection and discretion. We thought we struck that balance here. It's consistent with a lot of other authorizations that are already on the books at city planning. But if what you want to tell us is that this should be a special permit instead of an authorization, well, then, consider that part of your recommendation. We'd be happy to hear it.
I mean, most of the time, the community board only is an advisory, and it's in a case like this, since you're writing a law, could we have veto power?
Even in a ULURP.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the thing is in a ULURP, you're advisory, in an authorization as it stands, or if in an authorization which is proposed here, it's also advisory.
So let me ask you
But
a
you wouldn't
question.
make that change.
We've
We
also
don't
got a
have the
question.
authority to do so.
The city, the charter
That's
says
it.
the city
The
planning
charter.
commission has
Okay,
that
we
authority.
have, Doris has a question. She's had her hand up.
I just want to make, make people aware that hedge funds are buying up one-family houses in totally residential areas. And totally and changing the characters of the neighborhoods. If corner properties were purchased by hedge funds, that would have a whole different economic impact and not have any community involvement.
That's incorrect. How would they not have community involvement under an authorization?
I think she just.
Well,
means
they are
that-
not involved in the community was what I meant. They are not part of the community and
Oh.
not demonstrating what the community needs.
True.
Yeah,
They only have an economic interest, not a community interest.
fair.
And
The
this is a
department-
very serious concern nationwide. And it could start to happen here with issues like this.
Understood. The Department of City Planning doesn't regulate, like, we,
Who buys
this,
them?
yeah.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I guess.
I know
would
you
then-
don't, but you're opening the door by changing, by allowing this, you're opening the door. And that's, I want to follow up on what Dean says. We're going from
Opening
having
the door.
protections to no protections.
We are opening, this proposal is opening the door to a future discretionary action that would go in front of the community board of whether or not you wanted to allow a store in a residence district. That's true. What this is not doing, just to maybe state the obvious, is doing anything regarding the role of hedge funds in buying residences, which I suspect is a lot related to the affordability crisis in the city, which is a huge issue, which we are trying to do a lot about in our next upcoming text amendment. Again, we can't stop hedge funds from buying properties, but we can do a lot to try and address affordability in the city through other means. We don't see this proposal for allowing discretionary stores in a residence district as primarily responsive to that condition, but really happy and excited to talk to the community board about how we tactically address the affordable housing challenges in the area.
I think what Doris might have been saying on that is not really about the affordable housing. I think what she's saying is that if an entity such as a hedge fund came in and they are certainly able to afford to do the mini ULURP and the environmental, she's saying, and then the community board is, only advisory, that it may be the case that they are the ones that are now getting these commercial uses of these corner properties in residential areas. Is that what you were saying, Doris?
Yes, thank you, Lauren.
Sure, and I would say, the hedge fund is probably not the tenant, they're probably the owner.
They're gonna develop
And in that
it.
circumstance, let's say they want to put a business into that space, then that tenant, the hedge fund and the tenant would have to come in front of the community board saying, here's what we propose to put in this space. Here's our environmental review that shows you what we think it will do to the neighborhood. Would you like it? And you will tell us, and the city planning commission will have to make findings regarding whether that particular use is a benefit to the neighborhood character or not.
The commission also has the opportunity to add additional conditions.
Yeah.
If they see fit,
Okay.
as recommended by the community.
All
But
right.
even if the community board were to reject it, you still have the power to override the community board.
Absolutely.
Which is the same situation in ULURP.
Understood.
Which is
So
why
I
we-
have a very quick question. I know you want to move this ahead, but I guess on this point, it seems that this corner store situation is really something that is intended to be in a situation where people just don't have a local store. It's sort of like, a bodega desert. And this may be a naive question. I know that we have to work within the confines of zoning and the machinations that we have for those under the law. But it seems to me that this type of use should really be a use that should be primarily driven by a request by the community. Because if it is intended to be a situation that's really born out of community support, when you said, oh, well, we have, these strict regulations and they would really have to know that they have community support before they went in, is there any way to write that in that wouldn't be violative of zoning law? Do you know what I'm saying? For this particular situation?
It's not possible to limit the applicants to only the community board that obviously isn't actually the tenant that would be proposing the use. It is possible to write the findings that the commission makes in such a way that it's responsive to, we think, to the kinds of concerns that you're bringing up about whether that use is appropriate in that condition. We took a stab at that. We wrote the findings in this case, again, like the words I'm saying, would this be a benefit to neighborhood character? Does it create any neighborhood nuisances or concerns, right? Like there are very
These are
broad,
codified in this.
those are the exact findings that the city planning commission needs to make. So they do give a lot of discretion and weight to, I read it the way that the findings are written, and it's hard for me to imagine a circumstance where the community board says, we do not believe this fits the neighborhood character for the following reasons, and that the city planning commission would find something else, right?
I guess
It
many of
don't-
us are cynical and that there'd be so much
Absolutely.
money behind these. Just as you said, pointed out, you need so much money to initiate the process. That's very, it's very powerful.
One question about this, I'm not on the board, but could it be not more appropriate that this be not put in as something that stands as a current availability to somebody building and be kept as an application for variance, where it'd be incumbent on the planning board to justify the variance as opposed to them having more of a foot up, because it's already allowed to have that corner building.
a shaping.
And Stephanie, I think, wants to reflect that it's not the board, the
Right,
committee.
it's not the committee question yet, but we can hold that question
We're
for,
gonna hold that question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
so, just to continue, I know that there's a lot more on
Okay.
this, but I think we all feel like we need to finish this, and
We
there's
need to
not, there are
finish
not
it,
many
yeah,
because,
we're up to
um,
16.
Mhm.
We got 18 on there, 18, done.
Why don't I'll just do like the most reductive version of this. So we talked about corner stores, home businesses. I know we'll come back to it, but basically there are a lot of home businesses that are already allowed in the city today. We have a very we have a developed regime within the zoning resolution, but there are specific restrictions that exist within that we are seeking to remove to create a little bit more flexibility and response to the existing work from home conditions, while keeping in place all of the existing rules that are on the books about safeguards for home occupation. I know we'll come back to that one.
Okay.
Streetscape, a lot of areas of the city currently don't have any provisions for protecting against drive-throughs or curb cuts or bricking up your windows, or the kinds of things that really matter when you're talking about a great commercial street where you have business after business, right? Really active, sort of keeping that vital street. So we are creating an overall a sort of base design scheme that protects in different ways, different parts of the city, depending on the sort of intensity of pedestrian activity. Creating those basic streetscape design principles of, glass windows and like not bricking up your storefront and not having like curb cuts everywhere. Micro distribution today, you can have a US postal office, but you can't have the private version of that. So you end up seeing trucks like this all over doing their last mile delivery in neighborhoods. We want to allow that truck to happen inside a storefront so that people can have a small, micro distribution space on a commercial street, where they could do the final delivery of, by pedestrians or bikes to the local neighborhood, instead of only being able to have that kind of facility in an industrial area. These are size limited to 2,500 square feet in the C1 and C2 district. And then I think the final two, loading docks and use definitions. Use definitions, we sort of cover this without changing the actual rules of where things can go. We're reorganizing all of the use groups to be much cleaner and more modern. So you will see that the use groups that were previously 18 are being consolidated to 10. And that we're updating definitions in places like, typewriter repair, or things like shoddy manufacturer that are on the books, and putting forward new, a new organizational structure for how we define uses. Again, this is not intended or does not change where those uses can go in the city, but is intended to be much clearer, so anybody can go to the zoning resolution and figure out where they can be without having to hire, a zoning attorney to make sense of it. So that's a reorg move. And then loading docks, this is really also related to the small scale manufacturing. Let's say you have an office building in Midtown, half vacant today. You want to put a 3D printer up on the 20th floor that was vacant. That's great, except the way the rules work today, loading, changes of use trigger loading, and more intense uses trigger higher loading requirements. So you might have a building that was built in 1910 that had 2 loading docks, but all of a sudden putting the 3D printer in suggests you need to have a 3rd loading dock, which is not possible to cut into the side of an existing building. Our parking rules don't work this way. Parking, basically, you're allowed to use the parking that the building was built with, but for loading, the rules don't work that way. So to allow for that adaptive reuse over time, we're basically saying you can live with the loading docks that the building was built with. You do not have to add a new loading dock just to tenant an existing space. And that's the last of the rules.
Okay,
Great. So now we can go back to questions.
So I think we
Thank
probably should move to home occupations. That's a huge one. One of the things I just wanted to say regarding the whole text is that you may be, it just seems like very strong, powerful tools to address maybe not small concerns, but a minority of issues. And in our case, it's we're just concerned once again that it's a one size fits all, and that it would also incentivize bad actors, and they won't meet your intent. Our concern is that mostly with the negative effects. And once again, we have a more cynical view.
And I appreciate that. I think where we're coming from is like when we're creating new authorizations, there are dozens and dozens of authorizations on the books today that are infrequently used, right? So when they are used, it's extremely helpful, but they're not used every day, right? So that's not to say we may be missing places where there are bad actors, but we're looking at the history of how the actions are used. So very, very rightly, you're thinking about the malfeasance and, and the particulars here. Home occupations, maybe just to jump back to that.
Yes.
Today, home occupations are allowed everywhere in the city, and 99% of occupations that we could think of are probably already allowed. The zoning is very, very permissive today under what kinds of occupations can be allowed in the home. What the rules say today are, first of all, it has to be it can't just be a business. It has to be your home first. So 50, today it's 75% of your home needs to be dedicated to being a home first. You have to live there. It has to be a primary residence. 2, you cannot have signage. 3, you cannot sell anything that was not made on site. And you cannot create any undue noise, impacts, objectionable effects. There's a sort of large catch-all there for like nuisance factors associated with home occupations. That's today's rule. And we do understand, we heard from a number of you that there have been some cases where those rules have been problematic. But I would say for the thousands and thousands of New Yorkers that work from home, most of the time it happens without objection, right? So much so that like we do not know when our neighbors are working from home, right? Because they are legally allowed to, and they are following those rules, generally speaking. The proposal we're making is to take a very specific list of occupations that are restricted from being home occupations. So today, rock musician allowed, not a restricted use, but barber is restricted. PR, public relations person restricted, interior designer restricted, kennel also restricted, and a handful of others. Those are the 4 that occur to me. It's a list of about 8 or 9 professions that are listed as restricted. Again, everything else theoretically allowed, as long as it meets those other requirements of no signage, no objectionable effects, no sales of things not made on site.
What's the list?
So is there a prohibited
It's
list?
it's on the it's on the slide. I can pass over a
Kennel,
little bit.
interior designer, PR,
Veterinarian, I wanna say.
barber,
Pharmacy?
pharmacist.
What's the percentage of home use in the proposal? Isn't that changed?
50%.
We're proposing to move from 25% to 49% allowed.
And-
Right, so the point being, you still have to be first and foremost a home. But the reason we moved that up is because if you're a studio apartment and you're, 600 square feet, theoretically, the zoning says you're working out of the bathroom. We thought that was a little unreasonable in today's day and age. So we moved that up to 49% to just be, we thought, a little bit more responsive to like the fact that people are working in their living rooms and not
And
their
the
bathrooms.
number of employees has increased.
Yes, the number of employees is increased from self to allowing for 3, again, because we have heard cases where people have like a staff person or 2 coming to their home.
So let me get this straight. I'm gonna make it personal. I'll make it easy for everybody. You've been to my house. You've been to my house. I think you've been to my home. When he was running for office, but I have an apartment downstairs. It's 1,000 square foot. What could I put in the apartment?
In that apartment, you could,
It's in a residential street
yep, so
between
today,
Fifth and Sixth Avenue. What I want to know is once the zoning resolution happens.
so
What's proposed?
let me just start with today in that unit. You could have a rock musician who devotes 250 square feet to recording
I used
drum
to.
solos.
There was a dude who did that once and rented from me.
And I would say is if he's creating objectionable effects, right, like which is like noise to the neighbors,
Yeah, he was good.
technically they're good. But my point being, you could have any,
As long as there's no noise complaints, it's fine.
right, as long as there's no
Okay.
noise complaints, 250 square feet allowed for almost any occupation.
And
you
that
can
was
think of.
now.
But no barber, no interior decorator, no PR, public relationist, no pharmacist, no kennel.
Okay, now.
So in the future, you could have the, up to 499 square feet,
So half the space.
half the space,
Okay.
used for, all of the same occupations plus the ones I just named.
Why did we name with PR? Those are
We
all,
have no
those are
Exactly.
all office occupations. So it's either office use or when you say pharmacy, that's where I start to get
Really
confused.
frightening.
Is that a?
We have no idea why that particular list was identified in nineteen
So,
sixty.
no, and pharmacy, well, pharmaceutical, would it be a guy making compounded drugs in a residence? Is that what we're talking about? And
I don't
would
think
they-
that's legal
and would-
under any
and-
other
and
number.
Would there be, or selling,
It says
selling
So
pharmacy?
here's the
selling.
thing, we're not affirmatively arguing in favor of any one of these professions.
No,
in
I know that,
particular.
but I'm just
We're
curious why it's
responding
on
to it.
there.
We have no idea. Who hated interior decorators in 1961? It's
So
a
wait
very
a second,
strange
so
list.
why did we put it on the new list? Why don't we just take
We're
it?
not, it's a deletion.
There's a customer
Oh, these are
base.
being deleted.
Yes.
Okay.
So
What
there's a
then
very
what
strange list
They're
of
allowed.
restricted
can I
occupations.
do? So I could do a
Maybe
pharmacy.
they're allowed.
No,
Now,
that pharmacy is on the
With the new
restricted
regulations.
list, but like, name
See-
name another occupation, a strange
Something
one.
stupid like what I do. I'm in sales.
Sales is allowed.
It's allowed today, it'd be allowed.
Because it's
tomorrow.
not named as restricted. So there's no list of permitted, but there's this very strange list of restricted that we're trying to
Well,
delete.
pharmacy should be restricted.
How about a bakery?
Bakery allowed.
You
A
said-
baker allowed,
You said.
It's allowed now.
Currently allowed.
currently allowed.
Currently allowed.
Currently allowed.
Yeah.
To be a baker, but you can't,
to
you can't be a
It seems
retailer.
to me the
Correct.
restricted items had a.
Right, you can't be a
customer base.
bakery,
You can
because
be a
that would have
baker.
signage and,
Decorator,
right,
a
presumably.
pharmacy.
But you can be a baker, you can be a home baker that like is selling,
Cakes and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as Josephine was saying,
like, DOH regulates that in a different way.
businesses with a customer base, so now you're talking about a lot more customers coming in and out.
Lots of businesses that have a customer base are already allowed today. Music teacher, psychologist,
One at a time, but what about delivery?
I could run a music class from my house.
And back to the pharmacy,
Well, it's
because
not prohibited.
there was a provision where he said nothing could be sold from these home occupations unless it was produced on the premises.
That's correct.
Okay, in the case of a pharmacy, what, if it's not a dispensary, you're producing something?
Hard to imagine what that is, which is why I don't particularly think a pharmacist is a likely home occupation.
Well, what makes it,
But-
well, what could we do to make that unlikely? More unlikely.
I guess
More unlikely.
we're trying to figure out what is the concern. Again, I say, we're not looking to
Well, hold
particularly.
on, I'm not concerned, first of all, I'm not concerned about the marijuana thing. Because we have a legal way to do that, but can we put a dispensary in someone's home?
Under the state law, I don't think they're granting any
Okay, good.
dispensary
I wanna
licenses
know
to
that.
a home.
Now,
But you can
If
grow
I
the
may
home. Right.
interrupt, going back to pharmacy. I mean, if I picture a pharmacy, right, even though the pharmacist may not actually be producing the drugs, they're dispensing it. That's what a pharmacist does. I mean, maybe they're, compounding some drugs, putting some flavoring in kids' medicine. But to my mind, if I'm, let's say, in a residential apartment and I have a pharmacist now operating next door, even if he's just one single person, right? And you're permitting up to 3 employees. It's 49% up to 3 employees. I'm thinking, okay, well, now the apartment next door to me has a lot of deliveries coming in to deliver the supply. And how are people getting this, right? They dispense to people. It's a pharmacy, right? So you think about, how many prescriptions are being called into this person a day? How are those prescriptions getting out of the apartment? Are people coming in to pick them up? Is it going to happen through delivery? And to my mind, the problem that it creates there, especially, and I'm really talking more about an apartment building situation, is foot traffic and security. When you have, this really envisions if each apartment can be 49% of the floor area of the apartment And if you're talking about the occupants that are going to be there, it's of course the people who live there primarily, which may or may not just be the pharmacist, could be the pharmacist and his family, and up to 3 employees of the pharmacist. Does that make 4? I don't know. So I'm saying that's kind of a lot of people to be in an apartment of what size, I don't know. And a lot of foot traffic. And that's looking at 1 unit. But if there is no limitation on the right of each apartment unit to be used in this manner, what does that do to the overall residential nature? Not talking about it from a textbook zoning perspective, but talking about it from the viewpoint of a person who may live there. What does it do to the residential nature of this residential apartment building? It really turns it, to my mind, if I try to picture this in my mind, into a loft use, more like what we see in a loft building where it is intended as a live work situation. So the only feeling about this is if you're not intending that to be the result, then I think there has to be some limitation written in. I don't think that we should ever just assume that we're writing a rule for the purpose that it will never be used to its fullest extent.
The barber thing is a very good example because there's a barber shop on my block. But are you telling me that I could put a barber shop in the apartment in my brownstone building?
Yes, and in fact, what we've heard in a lot of particularly communities of color in the city is that there has been an increase in people doing home hair cutting.
Yes.
In the home, right? And so those are one case where we've heard in particular that there is, that those are an illegal home occupation, and that there is a real challenge associated with that. So that's one place where we know that these rules are actually quite needed, right? To recognize will change in the way that the city, that businesses are functioning in homes. If I may, just one other thing I wanted to clarify, a pharmacy is not allowed in a home today or tomorrow, because a pharmacy, to the extent that it is selling products not made on site, would be regulated, right? So the good question of what is a pharmacist, if not a pharmacy, I guess you could probably issue a script in your home.
Would he be a chemist?
Right. Again, we did not remove this list because we particularly thought that pharmacists were an incredibly important misbegotten use here. We're removing this list because we saw it as extremely anachronistic, sort of unexplainable for why these were called out when every other occupation in the city is allowed. It is not today regulated for foot traffic, and yet somehow we've managed to mostly persist in a city where people are able to have home businesses and have people into their homes, mostly with a zoning that works.
I'd like to stay on the barber shop real quick while we have it. Good one. So this little barber shops have maximum capacity, right? They have capacity numbers. You can't fit 100 people into a small barber shop legally, correct? What would be the capacity in this 49% of your home to be able to do? What governs?
Yeah.
How many? Because you and I, do you know the neighborhood barber shop? I go to the neighborhood barber shop. It's not only a barber shop, but it's a place to hang out, and it's it's where people congregate. And it's in every neighborhood, and it's not a bad thing, it's a good thing. But now what happens when you put it in the middle of the block, a residential block, right, on a ground floor? Now, what governs the amount of traffic in and out of there, and how many people are allowed to be in there at any given time?
I mean, but I think what you speak to is a very good point. Not only, it actually expands beyond home occupations, which is that the zoning resolution, I mean, it's what we deal with every single day. But it's one small piece of the puzzle of the sea of regulations around it. I'm not saying that they're all perfectly regulated or enforced all the time. Of course, that's not the case. We know that. However, they're put in with good intentions, right? A barbershop, there's, I don't know, state regulations or federal regulations about who can be there, the cleanliness of your products, just to use that as an example, and things like that. what we've determined and what we've seen from looking around at the city and looking at these, situations is what can zoning do, right? Where does zoning stand in the way? And where does zoning become an issue, right? Because we know for a fact that we don't want to allow, I don't know, to go back to the pharmacy example, we know we don't want to allow pharmacy, right? Where you get drugs from outside the building and then you sell them out your window or something like that. But we also know to go to a barbershop example, or I don't know what, a veterinary or something like that. Yeah, that there are a lot of rules that are way better at regulating some of the nuisances and some of the undesirables than the zoning resolution, right? We're not the best at enforcing some of those things. So what we found here is that for most home occupations, right, to go back to, I don't know.
Any clerical kind.
Yeah, something like that. Or I don't know, I make baked goods and my friends buy them from me. I don't know, something like that. What we found is that there's small hindrances, such as me not being able to hire a secretary, right, to work in my home or something, that zoning was in the way, right? Zoning was in the way, and it wasn't in the way in a way that actually protected people that much. It actually created high barriers to most good actors. And for the bad actors, in our opinion, we think that a lot of those will be caught by other licensing, authorities that are better at regulating some of these items.
Yeah, but the one about occupancy.
Question?
That's a question.
Sorry.
We've had her waiting. Go
Yeah.
ahead, Ann.
Thank you. The building department, I'm gonna use this word loosely, has been somewhat inconsistent about whether home occupations had to be filed with the Department of Buildings or not. And then sometimes it's an O2 and no change of CO, and sometimes rarely they have forced you to change the CO. What is going, how will that become more consistent, or how will it change under this zoning? And also, if there is not going to be a requirement for a building department filing in conjunction with the new expanded home occupations, how are we even going to know where they are or how they could be regulated? Because they will be basically under the rug in terms of enforcement. We don't even know where they are.
And that is the case today, right? There are, we believe, tens of thousands of New Yorkers that are working from home, some legally, some illegally. But that is the case, right? That we don't regulate, for the most part, what happens inside someone's home. So that is today the case, and we're not proposing to change that. I mean, I think precisely for all the reasons we all value privacy in what happens inside of our home, including when we work from home. So I'm not aware of the inconsistency. We'd love to have more information on that. It's our understanding that we do not, when there is no other change to the home, require somebody to file with the DOB what they are doing with inside.
My only concern, I'm sorry.
So that would be the case in the future, as it is the case today for the tens of thousands of businesses that exist in homes. The way we regulate them typically is when they become a nuisance, right? And that we understand also from DOB is part of their mandate, has been something that they have enforced over time. We'd be happy to hear if there are improvements that people would like to see in that. If there's something we could do in zoning that improves the means with which we have, we'd be interested to know it. That being said, we are not, for 99% of businesses, changing what is allowed under home occupations. So I think what we're looking for is to try and understand why we would subject this sort of random list of 8 occupations to a different standard than every other home business or home worker is subject to. So, again, I say that legitimately we're looking for that feedback to try and understand, given how flexible and permissive home occupation rules are today, and how we see this as really at the margins of trying to allow a few more occupations in. If there's some reason we should treat those occupations differently, please let us know.
Well, any place where.
Wait a minute, I have a question, please, after.
Doris, just as real quick, it's related to it. Will a landlord have a right to deny a tenant the opportunity to have a home occupation?
Yes, they do today and they would tomorrow.
But then the
It's not
tenant,
under zoning, under any tenant, or sorry, any
Please.
landlord. Can through your lease restrict what they want. I know that I've lived in buildings that didn't allow me to have a dog. And I've lived in buildings that didn't allow me to work from home. I wouldn't live in a building today that didn't allow me to work from home because I work from home routinely. But of course, that is the right of a lease, to specify those restrictions.
Doris, you had a question?
Yes, when you were reviewing the restricted home occupations, what were you thinking when you said it's fine to have a kennel? I have a 1,200 square foot apartment and 599 square feet of that can be used to board dogs?
Sure, I mean, I'll tell you my experience. I have a dog. I board him with other residents routinely.
Do you want that next to your apartment?
I actually have it next to my apartment today.
Dogs are there.
There is a dog that lives next door to me, and then downstairs from me, there's
That's not a kennel.
But look,
Is it not? I mean,
yeah,
to just present a hypothetical, I mean, I, as an individual, if I live in an apartment that the lease does not prevent me, I could have 12 dogs if I wanted to.
to own them as a,
Yeah,
as a
so-
dog lover.
But
Right, so-
I think you really need to review what some of the restricted uses were and not eliminate some of those restrictions.
Or at least, add additional, hurdles that need to happen. I mean, listen. If I wanted to put a kennel on 1,000 square foot, which is a third of my house, I could. How many dogs could I fit on 1,000 square foot? A lot. A lot, and it would be the neighbors, it would change the quality of life for all of my neighbors.
Yes.
Smelling all that piss and urine on the staircase.
course.
How is that good for
That's
the
what's
dogs?
happening in my
Have
house.
so many dogs.
And this
So
guy-
I think you guys are like this, I assume helpful to the board because you'll clarify what you tell us, and if there's something specific about kennels that's different than how you feel
I'd
about
say there's
interior decorators, then like.
there's gotta
let us
be,
know.
there's gotta be a way to regulate how much activity goes. Now, you said, I like the thing about the up to three people working for you. But what we didn't say is in the barber shop, could there be 40 people waiting to get a
Right, so
haircut?
you'd like us to see us talk about.
I'd like to
customers.
see someone have a maximum occupancy on this
Yeah.
home space.
So,
I
yeah.
don't know how you're gonna work it out
time.
at any time.
And I think that's a good comment, and I think again, you're taking notes.
And same
Um,
for the kennel.
I think the
owners.
challenge for us, as we're thinking about this, is that all of the existing businesses
Right now
allowed
don't
today
have
don't
shit.
have a maximum
Right, I know.
occupancy.
Mhm.
And so there is an inequity in considering that, right? But
So, okay.
point taken.
So your feedback, basically, you want to hear from us regarding the listed prohibited occupations. We're only commenting on those that we're saying, because everything else is permitted.
What is when you said there's an inequity between, say, a barber on the street corner, okay, or in a C1 or a C2, or whatever it is, and somebody who has one in their house?
No, what I was saying is like, if I'm I'm a teacher, let's say, that's an allowed home occupation.
Mhm.
And let's say I'm let's say I teach kids music classes. And I every Saturday morning have 30 screaming 4-year-olds come over to my apartment and teach them how to sing along. That's an allowed use today, and we don't restrict that 30 screaming 4-year-olds, though they might be loud. And I guess if they were loud enough, they would constitute a nuisance and they could be
There should
enforced
be a
against.
maximum
Isn't there
occupancy
5 kids
for
only
just a-
allowed in that?
That would be a fire
Kids
code.
allowed.
But
So yeah, there are so many other
yeah.
issues.
Yeah.
There you go.
But you know
But
what?
wouldn't, I think that
because the-
partially that would be, that's not really allowed because I don't know how you fit 30 children into 25% of an apartment. So I think that when you up it to 45%, you're thereby, concomitantly increasing the volume, right? If you have more floor area that can be used for a business purpose, and if your business happens to be teaching screaming children, you can pack more screaming children into 45% than you can to 25%. And I think that sort of adds to the density. But what I'm fearful of here is that in some of the comments I'm hearing, we've heard that like zoning's not the best at enforcing some of these things, and zoning doesn't, enforce what's done in the home, and that DOB doesn't really require filings for these things. And, enforcement, I mean, all of these, to write zoning is great conceptually. But once you're out of the process and this is voted on, and let's say it passes city council, after that, it's left for ambitious people to try to use to their best advantage. And the intent of this, of course, is to help businesses. And I think, and then at that point, the bounds of what is permitted is going to be determined by the courts. And so if it only says, so if we have a document that says, okay, great, you can use 45% of your floor area for, whatever permitted occupations are hammered out. And now no one's looking at that, you don't have to file for it. So nobody's looking into this. 45%, it's always 45% of what, right? This is the size of your business that's going to be permitted is going to be determined by the amount of floor area. If you have more floor area, you're going to be able to have a bigger business there, which means, more noise, more foot traffic, more whatever. Okay, let's say, nobody ever looks into this because again, these things don't surface until there's a problem. Usually somebody calls DOB. DOB shows up at this home. It's a home. I'm a DOB inspector. I knock at the door. Hi, how you doing? I've had a complaint. What's going on here? There's no, nobody takes a piece of, bright yellow tape and cordons off 45% of the floor area. It's not practically how business is done. No one walks around with a badge on saying, I'm an employee, not a person who lives here, or I'm, a visitor, person who's frequenting this business, whatever it may be, in order to purchase the things that are made at this business or the services that are rendered. So my question is, how can enforcement ever be done? I really think that my problem with this is that it opens up a door for an across the board live, work, use in every apartment. And I know that, the response to that is, well, you can do that now. You can do it now, but the right to do it, 25%, is so much more limited that it's so much easier to enforce. I think when you get it up to 45%, it really, because of enforcement, and I mean, I don't think that you can necessarily handle this in your drafting, but as a practical matter, because of the difficulty with enforcement, even in the best of circumstances, let's say we did have a fully funded DOB with lots of people on hand to go out and respond to these things, which we don't. How is this poor DOB enforcement agent going to know what's going on? Where is 45%? Who's supposed to be here? And I think that problem for me makes this really more of an answer in search of a problem rather than, an existing problem that needs an answer in terms of the home occupation aspect of it.
I was just going to say, I think all points that are well taken. I think it's really hard for DOB to enforce the difference between 25 and 45%. I think where they're better is when they're talking about nuisances, when you can hear people or dogs barking next door. Much easier than when you're trying to go into somebody's house and measure the tape. So that's certainly, I think, not lost on us here. Maybe there's somewhere that the board wants to think about in terms of the space between like not having a studio apartment, forcing somebody to work out of the bathroom, and the concerns over the largeness of the space. Like there seems like to me there's room to think about that, but points all.
And I think to add to that, again, Laura, you and I had a long conversation as well the last time around. I think to follow up on that, it's the kind of thing where, okay, we're talking about the number of people, let's say, who could be in a place. Well, is the number of people a problem in and of itself? No, the number of people is a problem because of what? the nuisances it can create.
Mhm.
And so instead of going upstream, we went downstream kind of and said, all right, well, how can we regulate some of the nuisances, right?
Right,
Just-
and that's, I
yeah.
think the conversations we've had with DOB are exactly to that effect, that the language, that the most important parts about home occupations for regulation are the signage, the sales, no sales on site, and the nuisance language. And we think though that language is pretty good, but open to hearing from folks, notwithstanding that like, we have a lot of rules already on the books today, but if that's the concern from the board, that the language is not strong enough, like tell us that. If the concern is that, in a large house, 45%, becomes very large, like, tell us that. I think you hear from us what we're trying to respond to, and like the world of like the tens of thousands of people working at home, and like not pretending they're working from the bathroom, and not pretending that an interior decorator isn't working at home too, and and so on and so forth.
I want to make sure I'm clear on something with the pharmacist. Am I correct in saying you cannot fill a prescription at a home
You can't fill
occupancy?
it because you couldn't sell drugs on the on site, that you can't buy the drugs from somewhere and then distribute them. That's sales.
But you can buy them and distribute them by mail.
No, same thing.
Same thing, okay,
Can't sell something that you didn't make on site.
Regardless of the
Gotcha,
method of
gotcha.
sale.
okay.
We had,
But you could do home compounding and sell it.
I guess in theory, under zoning, you could. I think that's about illegal under every other rule.
What was it she said?
Like if you made the drugs on site,
Meaning
like that you were more of a
it's-
maker than
I
a
was more of a
pharmacist.
scientist, yeah.
because in order to
Then you're
sell
not
it,
a
you have to
pharmacist
make it.
anymore because
Compounding-
nobody would allow you
compounding
legally.
pharmacies,
right?
It's pretty
Okay.
common nowadays.
Okay,
Making fentanyl.
I
Yeah,
mean,
but that's not legal, right? This is my.
Yeah.
Illegal under every other rule.
we had many questions that we submitted to
Yeah.
city planning. I'm not sure that we're gonna get through them, so I'd like to ask the committee if they, unless you have.
Do you want to go through like a lightning
Yeah.
round of some of them?
Lightning round,
I
okay.
just have one thing about DOB. Isn't it true with DOB that they can't go into the, like right now with illegal conversions, right?
To clarify.
You don't have to
yeah.
let people into the building,
that
so
was the
how are they
question
gonna
that I
get into
had
the
earlier.
building to check this?
Right.
If they can't get to the building now.
Enforcement is a very big issue because a noise complaint is not gonna go to the Department of Building.
Absolutely.
It's gonna go to the police department or it's gonna maybe go to DEP.
Yep.
By the time it gets filtered even through DOB and the DOB inspector comes, it doesn't get an answer, you leave an LS request and it's just very, enforcement is just, impossible.
Yeah.
It's lacking.
It's lacking.
Yeah, and that's well understood, which is why we're continuing to talk to DOB in every agency that you can imagine about this, including some I didn't even know existed.
How far are you getting?
Well, we do talk to DOB like pretty much every day. They
Yeah.
were.
But we haven't
you know,
seen anything like here that they're doing anything. I mean, for, as it currently is now, why would we think it would change?
Okay, I mean, fair enough. I think to respond though to that issue again, I would just return to, if the problem is they can't go in and check, well, check what? The point is, we're trying to talk about the actual issues that affect the neighbors, right? Noise, the pollution, if that could even occur in home-based businesses, something like that.
And obviously the landlord has a very strong
Yeah.
role here too, right? If there's one of the tenets of a landlord is creating an objectionable effect, like they have a lot of control under their lease as well, right? Like we understand that like eviction is complicated too, but there are.
It
other
takes a really
levers.
long time and it's very expensive.
Yeah, but that, right, like there's, that would be true whether they were doing it illegally under zoning or not.
So life science,
Well, wait, so
No, I'm happy to take it out of order or just.
do we want to hit the, wasn't life sciences on?
I think it is, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to forget that.
Yeah,
Right, so.
go for it.
What restrictions on, life science is a big word.
Yeah, so we're talking about labs,
We're talking
right?
about labs.
Labs today are allowed in all commercial districts except the C1s.
Okay, they're allowed in commercial.
They're allowed.
So
in
they're all
commercial.
residential. They're no
And
longer
they're
allowed in my
in
house.
residential today if they're inside a hospital.
Okay.
So today, if you
What do
were like
mean
up
if they're
by,
inside a hospital?
so for instance, like Maimonides, right, like farther up into.
Oh, I got
And
you.
wait,
Those,
right,
I got you.
Like if you're inside a hospital, lots of hospitals, the entire Upper East Side of Manhattan, for
Is
instance.
part of
All
Lenox Hill.
hospitals, all in residential districts, all have labs in them.
Yes.
So legal today in that condition, what we've seen is a lot of cases where like the lab is no longer part of Lenox Hill. but wants to move across the street from Lenox Hill under a different name, and now it's something else, and now it's not allowed in the same zoning district.
Okay,
So
so
the special permit we're proposing is to allow that kind of condition.
only by, so,
By special
so
permit.
now we have an NYU Langone on 66th Street or 60, no, 67th Street, Senator.
Right.
Okay,
So the
so
NYU Langone-
around that area.
They could come in for a special permit and say, hey, we're no longer inside NYU Langone where we'd already be allowed, but
Right,
we want to go across the street and be a separated lab
Lab.
use.
so it
can we
is
have a-
special permit.
And that special
Okay.
permit is for residence district only or for?
It applies in commercial districts as well because it allows you to access community facility, right? It basically is saying, the special permit is essentially saying, even though I'm not a hospital, I am effectively a community facility.
I thought they were allowed as of right in C1, C2.
Yes.
They are, but there are other rules that apply to community facilities, so there's reasons you might want for, so we have another up in near Alexandria, in the Upper East Side of Manhattan.
Mhm, I know.
There's a project there, that wants to build a lab, like across from NYU Langone main campus. And they are this case where they're in a C, I can't remember if they're a C1 or a C2 today, but either way, they would like to build as a community facility because that allows them different bulk rules, for instance. And so they are going through the special permit process to declare themselves a community facility, as opposed to a commercial lab.
So the new rules would just allow it near hospitals under special use permits.
That's right. So
Does it
that's the
say-
special
does it say
permit.
that?
Yeah, how is it?
How is
Is
that
it
worded?
limited?
The special permit is allowed citywide, but the findings again are associated with being. a
But
community
specifically
facility.
for labs,
That's
it
what
has to, with the new zoning text, it will have to be near a hospital. And it would need a special use permit, or it would be as of right, I'm asking.
So there's two parts of the proposal.
Okay,
One is the special permit, which is allowing for you again to declare yourself as a community facility. It is
Okay.
available citywide. It's hard to imagine where that we would, again, like, we're not seeing a lot of like calls for the special permit in other locations.
understood,
But that is a citywide special permit action.
okay,
We are also making a change to the lab definition, but it is consistent with already DOB existing interpretation. So under DOB practice today, there was an interpretations memo issued a decade ago. Labs are allowed in commercial uses. The labs already are defined as being allowed in commercial districts, but the definition itself is sort of weird and refers to like making teeth. And again, it's like this 1961's definition. So we're clarifying that based on an pre-existing DOB memo. We're carrying that language into the actual zoning text that just says a lab, it's just a lab, but with no objectionable effects. So there's language.
Wow.
So we're deleting right now the language is like a lab that is maybe medical or dental, includes the manufacturing of teeth and has no objectionable effects. We're simplifying that to just say a lab with no objectionable effects.
but
That's
still
what the definition-
requires a special permit.
No, that's as of
No.
right, but that's not a change. That is today's practice where
But in
labs
the
are already
C1
allowed
and the
in
C2.
in C2. C1s, labs are in the restricted list already. So that is a change
What
here.
about ours?
Do
But
you
the new
define objectionable effects?
Yes, under the DOB memo that I'm referencing, there was a long list of what objectionable effects is that refers to city, state, and federal laws that govern how a lab is cited. Those are in effect today.
Cited.
Every lab that is cited, sorry,
I'm a lawyer, I think of different types of sites.
the
You're
operational
thinking of C, not the S.
constraints. So if you are handling hazardous materials of any kind, you have restrictions on that.
Right,
If you have fire, you have restrictions on that.
But-
If you are handling any kind of germs, you have restrictions on that. So all of those things are spelled out today in an existing DOB interpretations memo. We're not looking to change those. So the same conditions
but what
apply.
about the R part of the overlay,
That
the residence part?
in an R district, you would require the special permit.
That's what I'm making
Yes.
sure.
But you will allow that
C1.
the lab in a C1 now
Yes, which
with a
has-
new
Yes, that is
proposal
the one
where
thing.
it's not
Yeah, and that's
allowed
legit. There
now.
is
I mean, this is on top of a residence district. I mean, that's really.
Yes,
so
and it
they're
is the
really-
case in the C2s already. And we don't see an awful lot of labs being built in C2s because of the density. Most of the times we see labs being built in the city, they're in higher density, you know, places like Alexandria
And
Center.
under the current rules, those labs are not just the medical and dental labs that you're talking about, they
They're-
include
they're-
all of the
they're-
high containment, whatever. the
Yes.
Bio agents.
That's right, because the DOB interpretation
Currently.
memo that's over, like, that's a decade old. Already clarified that definition. So there are many cases in the city where we have already allowed life sciences research labs in different kinds of C districts all over the city.
And these would also
Except
be-
in the C1s, but in the C2s.
So C1 also on a second floor of a building.
I can't tell you if we've seen one, you know, they're not often mixing uses because a lot of the other things that, again, like you require, like the objective effects requires extreme venting standards, extreme containment standards, extremely high power standards. So all of those things tend to mean that the life sciences facilities that are getting built in the city are not often in a mixed use building, even in a high density area. But they are allowed, and they are often next door to a residence,
Why don't we just say
particularly in a
that?
hospital setting.
I don't
Again,
understand why we just don't say that. You're not allowed in a mixed use building. I mean,
But there's no prohibition.
they are today allowed. in
but I'm
mixed
saying
use
to you,
buildings.
will they continue to be afterwards?
Yes,
Yeah.
Well, why wouldn't you just say no?
Because we have.
for what
yeah.
reason?
Because they're dangerous, and because you're mixed use building, you're talking about something that can contaminate other people through the walls. I mean, what we're talking about here is dangerous stuff.
So again, what I understand is that these are the most highly regulated type of business
I
that
don't
exists.
care. They're dangerous. I mean, you've never heard of any kind of, accidents with these kind of things that happen a lot.
Not in New York City, I
Oh.
haven't.
What, well,
And
if it happens in Chicago, but it didn't happen in New York City, that means we shouldn't look at it?
Well, I guess the question is, what regulatory structure is necessary?
That's my question, is
Yeah,
what regulatory is
regulatory
necessary?
structure is
Yeah,
there?
and
is
I
there.
think what I understand is that what are necessary are medical controls, hazardous materials controls, combustion controls. The fire department's in there, DOHMH is in there. The federal government, the CDC licenses every single lab that is working with any form of biological
Anything.
material. So what, again, like my understanding is that these are the most regulated businesses in the world at 3 levels of government. We have yet to hear where those regulations could be improved to to change the protections we have. And we have, we've been talking quite a lot again to our sister agencies, including a call with DOHMH last week. They have not advised us that they believe a prohibition on uses in, adjacent to residences is necessary, given the controls that are in place in the city and given the presence of labs that we currently have. But again, like up to the community board has advice on where you'd like to see bans on existing or future labs, like, that's the point.
But my just clarification, they are not allowed in our district.
Except is in
Except in hospital and especially special permits.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Can we move on?
Yeah,
to
what else?
questions?
Okay, so a couple of quick ones. I know you had asked about that particular language in the C1 and C2 districts and whether we were changing that underlying definition of an overlay. We're not. We
Right.
have talked to the DOT council about that concern about the interplay between the admin code and the zoning. We do not believe, and they do not believe, that this will affect the commercial zoning. And the reason is because, again, what that sort of the residence district extends over the streets. The commercial overlay is over a small portion of buildings.
Okay.
So when you're looking at the admin code and it talks about residential streets and their zoning, that's already the case today. Again, the language we put in there is clarifying language. It is already the case that commercial overlays reference Article 3 for their zoning rules. And it's this issue apparently has come up in the past that we have confirmed that commercial overlays did not change the commercial parking rules. They've been able to enforce that in the past. But we're 100% checking to make sure there's no texts that would help, like, ensure that it shared intent from both agencies. So it's a good catch, just to make us check that, but we do not believe there is an issue there. I think we already talked about corner stores. I think we already talked about home occupations.
Just curious on the home occupations, manufacturing. Those are allowed now? Will
Depends
be
what you-
allowed?
It depends what you mean by manufacturing.
Let's
I
just
suppose.
say, let's go
I
with
want, if I have a
that.
3D printer at home and I print out,
Marble bobbleheads. For example.
yes,
Sure.
probably.
Okay, so you could do that. That's cool. Let's say I have 8 people on sewing machines.
Not legal
No.
because of the number of people.
That's what I want to know.
Yeah,
Where's
and would
that,
be in the
where's that codified?
In the zoning.
yeah.
More than 3 people. So I
Yeah.
can have 3 people on sewing machines, but I can't have 8.
Yeah.
Okay,
Working 24/7.
Today you could only have one, in the future
I
you could
can
have
only
3.
have one.
But
During
You
normal,
can't sell the stuff that you make.
24/7?
You
Do
have to
we
sell
have-
the
if you
stuff,
make-
yeah,
If you
you
make
can
it,
only
you can.
sell it.
are there hours? Are there normal business hours allowed for manufacturing
Good question.
specifically? Like office is an office. You can work until
Yeah.
2 a.m. It doesn't bother anyone.
Uh,
But manufacturing,
yeah, no, the zoning does not specify the hours of operation.
might have to somewhere be said.
I
I
mean,
can't
we're
have
not- We're not allowing anything new there.
a manufacturing.
But you're modernizing
Today.
the-
It's allowed
the
today.
language,
That's not
so
part of the
why not?
change.
So.
Yeah,
whoa,
but
whoa,
Okay.
whoa. If
You're modernizing stuff.
Why wouldn't you change it?
Why wouldn't you change it?
We don't have the ability to further restrict businesses that are already.
Okay, but you could, future ones you can.
Yeah, if they're not allowed today, we have the ability to restrict the manner in which we're allowing
I
them.
think
If they're allowed today, we don't have the ability.
So if you
to-
have
No, no,
three
wait, whoa,
people
whoa,
working,
if they're allowed to,
they only
no,
work
if
9
they're
to 5.
allowed today, but they're actually existing, I agree. But if you're saying that they're, afterwards, that we could change it tomorrow, and whoever wants to build one, then could not.
We can't, because the zone, it's not about whether the business actually is in place. It's about whether the zoning today already allows them to be in place.
Right.
I'm just speaking specifically about manufacturing and noise. Noise
Yeah.
and pollutants,
And again-
the environmental.
Right, and again, we're talking, those are the downstream issues,
That's
right, and those are the things that.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, I understand.
But I mean, it's a
Right?
good point. We don't
Yeah.
hear a lot of problems today. It is allowed. And I haven't heard an awful lot of people like with industrial activities happening in their homes.
No, I know I actually know there was a house nearby and in the basement, had 3 women sewing patches and sewing stuff. And that's
It was-
fine, and then it never bothered me, it
Yeah.
didn't bother anyone, nobody cared, it was all cool
So technically illegal to have the extra 2 people that were sewing the
at the
patches.
time, so
but the
now
use
it's
wasn't
legal.
illegal.
Now it's
There's that
legal.
number will
But I
increase.
do think, noise complaints for business would have to go through the normal process.
Right, no, but I mean.
Yeah, although
expand
if
that.
you think it's a violation of the home occupation rule, you could report that instead to, 311, as I believe this is an illegal home occupation, it might go quicker to DOB.
Oh, okay, all right.
Okay,
Moving on.
other things, you would ask specifically about the difference, I think, between like some of the rules around a vet. And I think those really, again, relate to this distinguishing, like the same way we were talking about the difference between a pharmacist and a pharmacy, right? The rules around how a vet appears is around a commercial building, right? So a vet with a big sign and like occupying a sales space with an unlimited number of employees, right? Very different under the zoning than somebody boarding a dog in their home. So I think that gets to that particular question. I think we talked about the labs.
Yep, I think moving on to the
Yeah.
e-bike one, I know that question
Oh.
came up.
That's a big.
Yeah, look,
But
this is a tough one, but bike repair is allowed in a lot of parts of the city, and that includes e-bike repair.
It does,
So it is already allowed in C2s. The merger of uses with C1s would extend that. The city is doing an awful lot to try and deal with safe battery exchange. Ironically, you could not do that safe battery exchange in a C1 today because it is illegal to do any battery exchange in a C1. But yes, that is a bike repair includes e-bike repair.
I'm confused, what is battery?
Apologies, so
We had
the
Barbara
issue with
Tam, but-
Batteries.
that there's a challenge with basically cheap batteries.
Right.
That are inappropriately manufactured, and people have, right, so the city has been trying to address this by giving people
Oh, okay,
good
good
battery for
battery.
free.
Okay.
So you come in, you give your crappy battery to, to the city and they give you a good battery.
Right.
But that actual exchange, to the extent that that's bike repair, is not allowed as a legal use in a C1 storefront today.
But.
Can I just interject, because I know I had Barbara and Anne who have
Yes, I'm in.
questions. Barbara, are you? Barbara, I don't. Barbara, you're on mute.
You're on mute. You wanna go to Anne?
Okay, Anne. would you-
Yeah.
Oh, wait,
My,
okay.
my first a comment that I think what's is very important to all of us. In addition to preserving the peace of the residential life, is to see the excitement of the sidewalk and the ground floor street space. And I think that basically the allowing additional uses to occur on the upper levels is going to be harmful to the sidewalk level stores. And certainly not going to be a help to filling those spaces where we most want them to be.
Thank you. And
Yeah.
can, Barbara,
I agree with Ann, and so.
Barbara, we'll wait for you to unmute. I just want her to get. her
Barbara, you're
question in.
muted.
She's working on it.
I don't know if she's heard, I don't.
She's gotta have.
No, she's got it.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh, we
yes,
got-
okay. What bothers me in all of this is enforcement. Yesterday, a part of the building collapsed in the Bronx, and the building had been served with several violations, and nothing was done. So with putting all these rules on, who's going to enforce them?
The same people who don't enforce them now.
They don't have even electric. They don't have.
Yeah, the way we think about this is what enforce what and with what mechanisms, right? So the best place, the thing that's easiest for DOB is when there are moments of filing and there are new things happening. Like, what are they able to review in that circumstance? And then the others are when there are specific kinds of nuisances where they can, where enforcement is clear, right? And so in our conversations with DOB, we have tried to make sure that as we reform the zoning, we are making their job easier. Which is to say, making it clearer what they can, like, and reflecting what they can and can't do. Doesn't mean that, it doesn't mean enforcement isn't a challenge, but that's the intent with which we, with DOB, have approached the nature of these changes. And just with respect to the second story, certainly not our intent. I realize we didn't cover it. We have some information if it's useful. We have looked at storefronts in the area. I noticed, just looking at it today, there are 300 vacant storefronts in Bay Ridge total, based on the best data that we have available to us. Our entire purpose here is to try and
300 in
find,
Bay Ridge.
out of about
Vacant?
2,500 total.
How does this help to put people then in homes and in apartments? I mean, because what you're doing is saying to them, hey, you can work here, so you don't have to work on the avenue, and so you wind up with the vacancies.
The here in your version is in your home.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the concern is, if I make it easier to be a home business, I'm less inclined to pay a storefront rent.
Yeah.
That's
Yes.
the, yeah.
Yes.
I mean,
Why
it's
don't you
there's a
take the
contradiction there.
funding for this program and put it towards the empty storefronts that are currently on Third and Fifth Avenue and in the business districts already? This is not helping our community, what you're trying to do. You need to put your funds into the existing program, businesses that are here now.
Right.
I'm working on a program out in Suffolk County doing just that.
Okay, and I do want to
Just
get to
that.
community questions, but I want the last one. I
Call
want
Amazon.
It's already getting late and you're going in a lot of circles.
Okay,
and
there
we're
was one
not
last
getting the right
question that I wanted
question.
Carolyn to. We submitted questions and these are the answers to the ones we submitted. If you could just address the one, the light automotive repair, and then I'd like to
Yeah.
move to public, question by public after I get.
The dealers, which were our higher use groups now as of right in the C1.
So, in the future, new auto uses are no longer as of right anywhere. So what we tried to do here, it is today, auto isn't allowed in C1. It is allowed in the C2. And this was a really tough one for us where we looked and we tried to figure out like which direction to go. And we said, look, there are good reasons people want auto repair in certain circumstances, but it's also of all of the uses that are commercial in nature, the one that we hear the most consistent challenges on sidewalk usage. So what we've put in place is a regime where all future auto repair goes to the BSA for a special
Does that
permit.
include
And,
tire shops?
that includes tire shops.
Okay.
So the idea is that the BSA, we'd still allow the use because we think it's important. It's still an important, there are a lot of drivers in
People
the
have
city,
to fix their
particularly down here.
cars.
People have to fix their cars. We didn't want to make it illegal to have a tire shop. But we did want somebody to have to look at the new use and say, can you actually do your business inside the building? Right? So that we weren't replicating this problem of people basically depending on the sidewalk or the curb lane for the actual business, right? And I see it in my neighborhood on Coney Island Avenue every day that the actual body work is getting done in the
On the
parking
street.
lane, right? So
Street.
it's a real problem all over the city. Very, very hard to deal with when you're talking about existing businesses where the response would be to basically make them go out of business to deal with that challenge. Although that enforcement avenue does exist for people, but for new businesses, no as of right condition,
And just real quick,
except in
just-
industrial areas.
just to make sure, bike repairs are not allowed in my house. Because if that's e-bike and now it's batteries, now it's dangerous. And if you allow bike repair in a residential home as a home use, and e-bikes are part of that. Our fire department already has issues with this. People are dying
Yeah,
because
I
of
mean,
e-bikes.
let's
So
talk about
that's
it.
probably
Certainly-
something that
Certainly
should,
storage of an e-bike is legal in your home.
I know that.
Yeah.
But have a facility with 20 or 30 e-bikes
Yeah.
being stored in a home.
We're not legalizing bike repair.
In residence.
So it's an
I just wanna
interesting
make sure of
issue of
that.
how it's dealt with,
Okay,
but we're not
then
doing anything.
Then that
Just
should be
wanna make
addressed, but I
sure
would
that-
just like to, finally with, it's Anne and Doris, then I'd like to move to public questions.
Okay, thank you. The city of Yes has three components. The third is housing. And if you are encouraging businesses to move into second floors and to operate out of apartments, you are contradicting the needs that you define in the city of Yes, the need for housing.
Absolutely.
Well, I think there's two things here that I want to ensure we don't conflate, right? So there's the home occupations, right? And then there's permitting commercial on upper floors, right? And I just want to make sure that those two proposals.
Well, right
are not-
now, those upper floors are used as residences. And they are
Right.
usually the most affordable residences in our community. So you are taking away very important affordable house, the opportunity for very affordable housing.
Third, you then there are businesses.
Yeah, and look, and like we said, we think that it is basically impossible in an existing 25-foot wide building to convert, that's 3 stories tall, to convert that building where the residence is turned to commercial.
Once again, you use the word maybe, and the door open for it to happen. Don't, if you don't want it to happen, then don't use that word maybe. Be a little bit more concrete on your definition.
Well, I'm trying to be accurate to what the law says, right? Yes, somebody could, cut the existing ground floor in half and somehow create a new entrance and spend a lot of money to upgrade their fire rating to create a new commercial unit. Like it's theoretically possible. It is inconsistent with the way that we see buildings built in the city. And that's.
Would that be in any way more achievable under like the relaxed like zoning, the zoning lot merger, kind of rules that would be coming with the housing component, that's coming down next in the zoning, the next zoning resolution, in terms of, possibly like, borrowing FAR from another
Not-
building that would be.
No, not for commercial, because that's all about residential. Where it is more possible is on very large lots, right? So if you're talking about a large building, right, that's, not a 25 foot wide storefront, but like an
Right.
entire size building, you definitely could, and it might make sense to invest significantly in creating an entire new commercial entrance, right? So a dead department store, or something like that, like you might see being broken up into more than one commercial unit. But no, nothing about like FAR trading do we think is relevant here. If you,
Okay.
something else, Lori, feel free to follow up.
Okay, I'd like to take some questions from the public. Just when you had-
Okay, so we have an attendee, with her hand raised, Nancy Nolan. Nancy? You have a question? You should be able to
That's
speak
my
now.
question. I got an answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Let's, yeah, people.
Those who are present.
When will we, I understand we're supposed to be voting on this in, February of 2024, is that correct?
We haven't scheduled an official public
Well, is
hearing.
the question for us or for the community?
No, it's.
Yeah.
Oh, when is city planning gonna vote on
When
this?
no, for the community, I'm sorry, for community board 10, when are we gonna see your proposal before we take a vote on this
We
in
don't.
February? The public is not gonna see a proposal of
But
this?
the proposal is
Public.
public right now.
Oh,
It has
and
been
where is it located then on the New York City website?
Yeah, I mean, the community board obviously has copies of it as well in its formal process, but nyc.gov/yes economic opportunity will link you to all of the materials.
Now, do you have a date yet as to when this is gonna be voted on? If I
The
called.
community
the
board
office,
doesn't, we don't vote.
The community
yeah.
votes on it,
We,
right?
no, we make a
Oh,
recommendation,
yes,
yeah.
I'm sorry. I thought you meant that.
Yeah, the
there's
community
something-
board will
Oh, I
make a
forgot. Sorry.
recommendation.
Okay, let me explain myself then a little bit more clearly.
I'm sorry.
Okay, I called this office the other day and I was told that there was gonna be a vote on the proposal that you are presenting here this evening.
Mhm.
In February, the community was gonna vote on it. Is that right or wrong?
Right, so the community board will make a recommendation before the February date, so it'll likely be the January board meeting. We'll
It's
make a
advisory.
We're advisory.
It's advisory.
Okay.
We'll
so
vote as a community board.
How do
and
we, do
then-
we vote this up or is there a vote at all? I mean, what if we don't want this? Because I don't see any purpose here. I'll be honest with you.
If the community.
Yeah, I don't see where you're bringing anything to the table that is helping Bay Ridge, Brooklyn at all.
Fair enough.
Okay, why don't you just take the funds that you've been allocated to produce this proposal to the community of Bay Ridge and put it towards helping the small businesses that are already struggling post-pandemic?
Fair enough.
That's what you should be working on, not putting or worrying about whether or not a business is on the second floor of a building. Who gives a crap? Nobody cares. No one's gonna even go up there. It's way off the market value of the property of Third and Fifth Avenue.
Okay.
We wanna walk past the business.
Okay.
We don't wanna look up. We'll look up for our attorney's office,
Thank you.
but we're not gonna look up for a bike.
Do I have your permission to
Yeah,
respond?
you have my permission there.
Okay. You, as a community board, can put whatever recommendation you want. You can make it as long and detailed as you want, or as short and simple as you want. If you, as a community board, say, we hate all of this, then you can put that in the recommendation and say to the CBC, we don't want any
So
of it.
basically, what you're telling me is that the community has no say in this. This is already gonna happen. Am I correct in saying that, community board 10?
No, we-
That's the opposite of what, yeah, no. The city charter, which is not the zoning resolution, we have no control of the city charter. The city charter gives powers to the community board. And to my understanding, almost all of those powers are advisory. The city planning commission, in this case, has the final word.
Well, the city council. has-
City
Or the city council, I apologize. The city planning commission and then the city council, they have the final say about not only whether or not the proposal goes through, but how, right? There's opportunities to modify this, certainly, that's why we're here.
And look, I understand the cynicism,
Okay,
like,
so
from-
we're putting it forward. Right?
It is
No,
already.
citywide.
It's a citywide, it's a citywide zoning tax. It's not just Bay Ridge,
So-
it's citywide.
Yeah, if I-
That's what it is.
if I may-
That's some of what it's about, but you chose specifically Dyker Heights, Bay
No, no,
Ridge.
it's the whole
No,
city.
the whole city.
No,
Whole
no,
city.
whole city.
Okay, why are we putting this, then why isn't the city then, if it's a citywide thing, then why isn't the city of New York? Why are you pushing the mayor's agenda in doing this? Why are you doing this? Why don't you just help the businesses that aren't working?
Maybe
Our-
we can, maybe we can
Pandemic.
answer that question afterwards. I just want to get the
Philosophical,
last, Victoria, you have a question?
I just want, the man that was sitting here, I
Yes.
think what he was, and I agree with him, and I think a few people kind of had the sentiment. I think it was talking specifically about the corner houses and the businesses. Since you're saying it seems to be more of an oddity, is there a way to put something like that in effect through VSA special permit variance rather than the total zoning text amendment?
Yeah,
For these things that are coming up that seem to be very specific.
Yeah.
For that was what I think he was
yeah,
suggesting.
so the circumstances we're talking about here,
Thank
like, you know, for whatever reason, the community wants to approve a single store that happens to be in a residence district. That's not actually a candidate for a variance, because the variance, you have to prove financial hardship or
Right,
uniqueness.
is there
of condition.
another method?
This actually is very similar, though, to that kind of idea, which is that it's a special exception that
Right,
is.
but we're saying that it might be good for them and not good for a lot of the rest of the city. So what we're saying is there a way to do that in a different way? Could it be through the city council putting in legislation? That was, I think, what he was trying to say.
Well, this is the city council putting.
No,
through
this is the
legislation in
zoning
the
text
Senate.
amendment which affects our whole city. He's talking about making it an exception. So I'm just saying it's a way to maybe get some of the things that you're talking about that only affects certain neighborhoods, to find a different venue, a different process to let that happen, rather than making it for the whole city. That was, I think, what he was suggesting.
So
Just a thought.
just to say again, if the neighborhood of Douglaston in the future chose to allow an application for a corner store in Douglaston, that has no effect on Bay Ridge.
Right, I'm
Right,
not
so-
saying that, you're making a ton, but you're making something that we don't like that maybe someone else does. So we're trying to find a way to pull out those pieces that you think will help part of this. That's the problem with the one size fits all. This is the problem. It's just like this kind of thing. So it's just to think about some of those components that might be useful
Yeah.
for some people. Is there another way to do it? That's not my.
Yeah, and look,
Okay,
the
I
zoning
understand
resolution, which is the citywide infrastructure for how we define where land uses go, does refer to the entire city, and every authorization on the books, of which many have never been used in Bay Ridge, does theoretically apply to the entire city.
Unfortunately, we worked on zoning a long time, and I worked very hard on the zoning when we told to do contextual zoning rather than our favorite special district. Luckily, I fought with Gentilly to keep that little section open, so we have that tool, because we were lied to. Because right after we did that, and we're told certain things would happen, the whole thing changed and we got lumped into everything else, and it actually hurt us. So we fought for a lot of years to get something that we were promised that didn't happen, so we are skeptical with justification. But what I would like to say on my,
Yes, your
on my thing
question.
is this, I agree with Doris 1000%, and I talked to Joe about this. You had all this manufacturing area. You rezoned, not you personally, but the city rezoned the manufacturing, almost all the manufacturing has been rezoned for mostly luxury housing with tax abatements that we unfortunately get to pay extra taxes for in real estate, right? Because everybody's properties values went out, but there's 30-year tax abatements for some of these properties. Now you have all these people coming in that are makers that want to make things. So we have already made a bad decision by changing that zone. And so it seems to me what we're doing now is we're trying to find a way to help some of these kinds of businesses. But then we're affecting the residences. That's my concern. How is this going to impact our residences? We have a careful balance. The way that our neighborhood is crafted is very well thought out. Where our commercial strips are, how it worked organically as well as with the law. And so what I'm concerned about is who are you going to be pushing out and displacing with this thing? Because above the stores, there is mostly residences. They're not unoccupied.
Yeah.
So we don't want to destroy that balance.
We agree.
But that can happen with this because there are bad players. And because the OB right now, if you have a legal conversion, which we've been fighting, they don't have to let you in the house. So if you have an illegal business, they don't have to let you in the house. It's their constitutional right. So you're asking us to take a big leap with a lot of things that we've gone through that we know there's no teeth. So I'm just saying there's these considerations. How do we find the balance between the business and the residents? We support our businesses. I shop locally. Do not go to Amazon, anything else. A lot of us. So we want them to survive, but we don't want our residences displaced.
look, I think we 100% agree with that philosophy.
But that's a possibility with this.
We don't see it, but please help us like see where we're seeing those interactions. And I would just say regarding the manufacturing, we, you know, when I think of, you know, the jewelry makers, the pickle like guys, like all of these businesses that you would think would be allowed in a commercial area, but for some antiquated reason in zoning, we're not allowing them onto a street. That's exactly like when I think of small businesses and what makes New York great, especially Brooklyn, which has had such a,
But we
as
have
you say, a
that with
recurrent.
manufacturing. If you look in our neighborhood, we have those manufacturing corridors. Right? If you want to do a brewery or something like that, you want to do that. This is not the location to be doing that, but they made them so ill-affordable because they rezoned all those areas and made luxury housing. We have a tire shop that's legally here on 67th and 5th. I mentioned it to Josephine. We have people that do automated repair legally here already. We have everything you're talking about, we have like a model neighborhood and we like to keep it. We have a mix economically. We have a mix ethnically, we have a mix with age.
Again, we agree, and I think the community board will tell us the ways in which.
Okay, we're gonna have to end. It's very late. We've already been here for almost 2.5 hours now.
Yeah.
I'd like, we have to end the meeting right now, but thank you all very much for attending. We appreciate your comments and.
And there are lots of
Thank you.
questions
Yes,
that are
we
on
will.
question that we'll cut and paste and send them.
We've done everything, the whole committee really appreciate it.
Just one last question. How many, you know how many,
I think Stephanie's trying to end the meeting, so why don't we happy to hang around.
how many requests have you gotten from community board 10 for rezoning? I mean, how many people have written to you and said, we need rezoning?
Can I ask the,
Over a period of time?
We're definitely not, we're not talking about rezoning.
Right,
here.
Yeah,
that's the thing, they're not.
0 things will be rezoned here,
Okay.
0 properties.
All right, thank you all very much. Have a good evening.